Very weird. Regardless, I'm gonna keep going. Oh, I think it's coming up now. Cool, cool, cool.
Perfect. Super.
Sweet. Mana Eruption takes out the Spindle Bastion. I guess it's saying that the Basir player does think that their removal is going to be a relevant factor in this game. Also, totally understand why, considering that this Tasia build seems to be built around Yeti. So they're really anticipating having important things stick around for a while, it seems, and try to sort of combo off with other characters that they're playing. So definitely in that case, understand why they want to get rid of that Spindle Bastion, but can't help but feel like this start is so much better for the Tasia. Now the Basira down in mana, relatively even on cards that the players have access to, and the Tasia has a Dracana out, sticking around with the boost on it as well. Things looking good here for the Muna player.
Indeed. And I think I have just about everything I need sorted as far as setup here last minute so I can pay attention to some games. Appreciate everyone that has joined thus far. Appreciate Keelan guy for talking a bit while I stare. And
Happy
yeah,
to do so.
and so I wasn't paying too much attention there, but it looks like is that the same fire rabbit that I saw earlier? And they
Yeah,
were
it
able
did
to.
get a helping hand to
Mm,
have it lose fleeting. Notably, it was a rare helping hand, so the one that itself has fleeting but gives two boosts instead of the one. Sort of an interesting choice for Basira. Definitely a lot less easy to make use of that on the card advantage end, but if they do have the extra cards, it can be really powerful and does represent a lot of boosts out of nowhere and key opportune times, I guess. But
yeah.
yeah, definitely not super common to see. But this Fire Rabbit on its own, just notably, like playing that from anywhere, when you control a fleeting character, it gets two boosts. It itself having fleeting at this point, that's a beefy stat stick just on its own entirely. So super cool.
Yeah, it's interesting to see a rare helping hand. I think the only time that I've ever used one, and it was just kind of like a one-off that I found fun occasionally,
Hmm.
was when I
Hmm.
was running in its Saudi deck to get additional boosts on gigantic characters and occasionally remove fleeting a little bit. But past that, don't really see it that often. I think you almost always typically see the common just for
Hmm.
like you mentioned, the card advantage side of things. But seems to be working okay for them thus far. They are still behind on the tumult, dealing with the usual anchored stuff that Tasia does, so we'll have to come
Yeah.
back here shortly.
It's also sad here because the Basira is missing a potential card draw from this Ozma unique that they played with the Leaves the Expedition Zone if they have one or more boost draw card ability. That could have been actually sort of relevant here. If I mean, it doesn't change anything as far as winning on the Tumult this turn, but getting an additional card there might have given them a little bit more tools to try to fight through this Tasia. But as it stands, things are just so good for the Tasia as well. I mean, I assume the Tasia is playing some amount of removal themselves, and at this point, any removal spells from them are also looking to be, I mean, probably strong enough to lock up the game on their own. If it's something like Beauty Sleep, almost more doubly so. But a clue coming out from Basira. This card is absolutely one of the reasons to be playing Basira at the moment. Incredibly strong with the ability to, thanks to the Basira hero ability, to exhaust multiple cards in reserve at once. And if something else does enter reserve or is still hanging out in reserve, oftentimes it will end up getting another boost from something like a physical training or a different card effect in general, and exhausting even those things. So it's definitely a pretty cool card to be seeing out of Basira. Pretty large as well, so sometimes can be hard to fight through, and dodges some of the popular removal in the game. Cards like Off You Go don't hit that thing, which is pretty sweet. But yeah, the Tasia shows us here a pretty sweet, unique Inari that does have the potential for mass anchoring. So we're going to see here if they are able to anchor something else with it here, or potentially even just outstat this Aklut as it stands. They won't be outstatting the Aklut, but they will get to anchor their Aloe Vera again for yet another turn. And things are looking so smooth for Tasia this game.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, they didn't have any other play there for the Basira because they immediately passed following the Kloop play. Um, Curious as to the decision potentially to throw it on the hero side opposed to the companion side. Do you think there was any
Mhm.
particular reason behind that? Just hoping to be able to contest that side and they didn't have enough stats to set up on the hero or something along those lines?
I'm sorry, you're asking why the Aklut ended up on the hero side, you thought?
Yeah.
I think just because it would be so much easier to outstat than on that companion side with the aloe vera that had already stuck around. And playing the Aklut natively when the Tasia would be contesting on the water expedition, the Aklut is a little bit stronger on the water to start with. So that could definitely be a reason why. And we're now seeing the third unique this game from the Basira. I mean, they're all really cool uniques. They're just not at the level where they're going to ever be able to outclass something like that Inari of the Tasias. It's a cool council that, has that native council ability preventing the reactions of the reaction abilities of characters facing it. However, yeah, otherwise at this point, I think it's too little too late for the other effect to matter as well, where another character joining the expedition lets them put a card from their hand in reserve and give the council a boost. But problem is, at this point, there's already way too much on the companion side, and they're still at risk at being outstatted on the hero side as well. So, yeah,
Yeah.
good one for Tasia. What can I say? That was a sort of a Tasia steamroll. Sometimes we see it. Brutal though.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the main reason I was asking as far as like the statistics are concerned is because usually when you try to spread your or try to go the opposite end, and especially
Hmm.
when you're behind, I feel like a lot of the times it's almost better to contest in some scenarios and hope that, especially when you're knocking out two characters with a double exhaust, that they don't have enough in hand and they only
Hmm.
had enough to contest you on one side to prevent any type of 2-0. But, yeah, it makes a lot of sense what you're talking about there, and a lot of fun uniques in general for the Basira that we got to see all 3, but, Tasia does end up taking it as we switch back here. The first Swiss round of the AWOL Season 2, Wednesday Weekly, number 6. A lot of games still left to play here. We did end up with 75 total entrants, always nice to get
Pretty
that
good for
64
Wednesday,
mark.
yeah.
Yeah, always nice to get over that 64 mark and keep things steady for Wednesday. Hopefully, one day we'll get up even higher. Who knows? But in the meantime, we'll take a look to see what else we have playing. That game went fairly quickly, so we have a lot to still take a look at. Let's just scroll on down and try to find some names that we may not have seen quite yet. Um, Runfolk got a bye. They were whoever they're playing was afraid, apparently. Um,
I would understand as well, given the reputation that Runfolk has for some of the decks. Yeah, they see that pairing. Yeah, better not show up. I don't want to deal with hostage Akesha.
yeah. Um, let's see. Table 33, why not? It has low percentage on it.
Sweet.
Table 33. Switch on over here. We have a Finn and Crowbar versus a Sigismar and Wingspan with a Grand Endeavor out and a unique Sandman on the companion side.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Seems like a pretty good spot outside of that Grand Endeavor sticking in play for the Sigismar. Things looking good for Fen. It's a funny dynamic here where the Fen can outstat on both sides here easily because the Sigismar did spend their turn playing this Grand Endeavor. However, it's going to be hard for them to deal with. It's likely going to come down to a dynamic where the Fen is going to be reliant on resupplying cards that let them discount their upcoming plays and then find a cloth cocoon for the grand endeavor. And that's what's going to take for them to sort of come back into this. But otherwise, they are in a reasonable position to just try to double advance repeatedly in order to deal with the Sigismar's single advance through the Grand Endeavor. However, if anything breaks that, for example, this Sandman unique that we're seeing right here, it is threatening to potentially sleep more things when it's played from reserve as well as from hand. That could be potentially very dangerous. But seeing a card that just got resupplied by the Fen, this Silent Knight, it makes me think that they're actually potentially on a festival configuration, and in which case they might not care about this Grand Endeavor whatsoever, as long as there isn't a double advance this turn from Sigismar.
Yeah, if they are in fact on that festival configuration that you're mentioning, especially after getting that additional draw from that unique Sandman that you mentioned
Hmm.
of being able to draw 2 cards, and just having a massive hand at this point for the Sigismar, you have to believe that they have some type of interactable to at least remove characters. I think a lot of Sigismars have gotten away from the sticky note seals, it seems like. I don't know what your experience has
Yeah.
been with that. They seem to feel like it's a little bit of a dead draw. So I would have to imagine they may have to worry about something like a teamwork training
Mhm.
or a tiny jail, but other than that, like you mentioned, I think there's a lot of resources for both heroes, and they're even at this point, so it's just maybe a battle of the permanents on who can take it.
No, you're totally right. I think that one of the really nice things about Fen with playing that festival strategy is that oftentimes you're not at all reliant on it. You can win the game just by playing Aloe Vera and Anansi and other cards oftentimes, but it does give you ways to deal with cards like Grand Endeavor without actually having to interact with them. So that is super sweet. I'm a little bit worried here this turn because I think the ideal scenario for Fen would likely be to not contest on the Tumult anymore, but instead try to play for that festival win. And in which case, one of the best things that they could do would be to just play a festival this turn. But it doesn't look like they're going to be able to do that, largely thanks to that Sandman that's just hanging out in the reserve for the Sigismar as well. Potential of taking 2 expedition wins that way is just too high at the moment. And so for that reason, I think, they're sort of forced into the contesting of the tumult now. Luckily for that gameplay strategy, Anansi, really good at it, coming in from reserve here. 2 mana, 666. That's a pretty good cost to stats exchange rate if I've ever seen a good one.
Yeah, and we do have a unique out for the Sigismar, one of those token generators, and it allows it in target expedition as well, as we see another slow play of the Foundry mechanic, allowing for them to still play that Sandman if they so choose to see what the Finn has left here to play. They do have a lot of one cost, so they could equally slow play, it seems like, at the very least, potentially trying to use the Silent Night or even the martingale or any variety of cards. That's the beauty of
Mm.
playing Finn in general, right? There's about 50 different lines that you can think of at any point, especially with cost reduction cards. So
Yeah.
there we go. We do see a cost reduction, so we'll see what they're going to do there.
It's interesting, actually. Iron Arma here, our Fen player, did actually get an Innovator Award, and I believe played in the KGB Unique Invitational actually like a week and a half ago. With, I believe it was a very similar Fen configuration, if not the exact same one that they're playing at the moment. I think one of these really interesting includes that does actually potentially make things a lot easier for them here is the choice of playing a card like Joyride. It's going to make them have a little bit of an easier time actually contesting on the Tumult if they're forced to do so. That one, we've seen it a couple times out of Afanis using a rare slot for the out of faction rare there. But just being able to put 2 additional boosts onto something and after you for 1 mana in a lot of cases out of Fen, that can be a really strong line.
Yep. So we do see basically a free play here at this point for the Sigismar to decide if they do want to contest. I would have to imagine if they do, it's probably going to be on this hero side at this
Hmm.
point, unless they do want to do some funky stuff with that Sandman, which they very well could either way. But they do still have 5 cards in hand from the previous draw on the day. So we'll have to see what they have to come up with here. I gotta imagine if they can still get at least one advance or potentially go one for one, they're still feeling quite good with the Grand Endeavor still in play.
Hmm.
But we'll have to wait and see what they end up doing with the amount of cards that they still have available to them.
I have a feeling at this point they were trying to figure out whether a removal spell plus playing a character would be enough to potentially win the game this turn, or win the game this turn via double advancing and then having the Grand Endeavor move them the final expedition advance they needed the next turn. But it seems like that's not the case, and here they're valuing just getting rid of that aloe vera over everything else. I'm still assuming that they're going to find a progression this turn. I'm just interested as to how exactly. And yeah, the oh, interesting. Yeah, the Jack Frost, it wouldn't normally do it on its own, but thanks to that unique foundry mechanic that is in play, lets them make the additional Ordis recruit token, and they will handily find a advance on the hero side. Yeah, trading 1 for 1. That's virtually a 2 for 1, thanks to the Gren Endeavor. But it is worth noting that Fen either threatens to win the game via a double advance still, or potentially via that festival win con if they do indeed have it. So they're not out of it just yet, despite how strong Grand Endeavor is looking in these spots.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm curious about as far as your opinion is concerned, if anyone has watched the video that I released today on Blue Oak TV, you can figure it out as well. But Jack Frost in the Sigismar deck lists, Clay with the Altered Aces is not as much of a fan as some Sigismar players are concerned.
Mhm.
Feels like the spy in of itself is just as good and doesn't use up the rare slot. What's your opinion on Jack Frost and how it's played by Sigismar players as someone who's an Afonis player and has to deal with it occasionally?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's likely a lot more relevant in other matchups outside of just the Afanis matchup. Oftentimes, as Afanis, you're really not looking to try to be playing your cards out from reserve. I can also particularly say if you're playing Afanis and your Sigismar opponent pays 3 mana for an Orda Spy to get rid of whatever's going on in your reserve, you are typically celebrating because it feels like you win the game. That's how good it feels if they're spending 3 mana on a 2/2/2 instead of one of the other many more absurd plays that Sigismar can often do. Jack Frost does feel a little better than that, but it does, as you mentioned, cost that rare slot. And I think it really depends on the configuration overall. I have seen some very aggressive, like pressuring Jack Frost style decks, and I do think that they work pretty well, especially into like Bravos heroes, for example, in a lot of cases. And sometimes they can be critically good against things like Fen, exactly, where sometimes as Fen, you're reliant on his support ability at a key time or being able to play out like an aloe vera from reserve. And Jack Frost can sometimes just flip the weird turn order dynamics that sometimes come out there on its head, where suddenly you just can't get the same advantageous turns anymore. But again, I sort of tend to agree. I think that oftentimes, or it's not necessarily that the lists without Jack Frost are better, but I think that the Jack Frost lists are not fully understood yet. So for that reason, I definitely understand why someone like Clay might mention that they're not a big fan of them yet.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I guess it also depends on the individual, what uniques they're running, if they can open up some rare slots based off of those uniques, and
Mhm.
so on and so forth. But it's always interesting to see people's opinions on it. I've definitely
Totally.
seen it work quite well in comparison to an Order Spy that you don't want to quite pay 3 mana before, like you have mentioned before.
Mhm.
So we'll have to see how that turns out, but we do see a double cost reduction come out here with those Inkcaster support abilities, and just throw out an Esmeralda for free.
Yeah, wonder what that says though. I'm interested as to what they're playing around here by cashing on the Inkcasters already, rather than oh, I understand. I
Yeah,
see.
there you go.
Their last card in hand is Festival, and unfortunately, we're meeting one of the most absurd cards in Sigismar at the moment that they have access to in Rallying Call. Believe it or not, this completely ruins the Lyra Festival game plan
Yep.
because for 1 mana, they can have the opposing Kodama gain a boost and lose a sleep. This card is absolutely insane and is probably single handedly the most relevant reason why the Afanis versus Sigismar matchup is now terrible for Afanis. Rallying Call so strong against the key removal spell. It's not truly a removal spell, but pseudo removal and Beauty Sleep in that matchup. And in this one, it just prevents the Fen from getting that remaining condition that they need for the Lyra Festival. That was a sweet turn that was set up there from the Fen, but yeah, the Rallying Call, it's so good and takes it very handily.
Yeah, I've definitely had even my fair share of Sigismar mirror matchups be kind of ruined when the card I want asleep due to a Sandman doesn't stay asleep because of that rallying call. So
Yeah.
I can understand your frustration as far as your beauty sleeps, because I've definitely seen you keep use beauty sleeps to keep fun uniques out on the board, especially have when they have a
Oh,
when I leave the expedition effect. But
it's so ultra flexible is the key thing, and already Afanis versus Sigismar, for example, is a matchup where Off You Go is just not a good card to the point of where you put it into mana as often as possible because of how many of the Sigismar's threats are either purely a free token or otherwise doesn't give you a mana efficient play. And then, meanwhile, Rallying Call, not only at its worst, is a after you. A little better than that is it puts a boost on something at a time when it might be inopportune for you playing against it. Three, it can unsleep their own characters. And four, if you sleep your own, it can also unsleep your own characters. So no matter what, you're not getting your optimal scenario against a Sigismar now, ever.
nice. But yeah, I did hop over to table 2 with,
I'm on it.
watching some Cole Robbie gameplay here, who is still trying to eke it out in this longer than average game, playing up against a Traced that apparently had some fun uniques based off of the chat.
Yeah,
So we'll
I'm
have to take a look at what
seeing
we got
this
going here.
chat as well. This Harry Potter otter that's currently in reserve for the Traced does some crazy things. It has the Well, it has the ability to let each player, when it's played from reserve, each player may put a card from their hand in reserve. But more critically, when a card goes from your hand or deck to your reserve, you create a 2/2/2 brass bug token in whatever expedition you like. Traced can put cards from their hand or deck into reserve pretty easily, which translates into a lot of brass bugs wherever you like them. That's kind of insane, and we're also at the stage of the game where the deck for the Trace is actually a very small number of cards, which means they are actually able to likely start looping into their more absurd cards again and again. Notably, there are, three Lyra Chroniclers, for example, in their deck. Also, lots of various things that would resupply in general. So, if they are able to keep a Repotter Otter like this around in any way, or find it again, for example, they will be able to make infinite brass bugs, essentially. Not truly infinite, but large numbers of them pretty easily.
Yeah, it's fun being able to see these trace decks adopt what it seemed like the Sierra strategy from season one of utilizing the Ouroboros Lyra Bastion to kind of cycle through your deck, and not entirely surprising that they've already done so. And when it looks like they're at about or at 9 mana, so day seven. So
Mhm.
still impressive there, and it does seem like with all the stuff that they have going on and the limited amount of mana that Cole has on the Tasia, that we're going to get at least one advance. And yeah, we do go one for one there. So, and they still have a quite large Gabil there, or Gibble, I don't know, Gerbil, still out on the field, as well as that Repotter Otter that we did mention before, that will basically just constantly produce those brass bugs that are courtesy of the trace ability. So, not looking ideal for Cole, but yeah, you never know. Miracles can happen sometimes.
Just like looking at the cards that the Trace has access to right now, if this Repotter Otter doesn't leave pretty much immediately, things are going to get absurd so quickly. Harvest sitting there in reserve, awesome card for that. Then there's Traced Hero ability already. If there's a permanent found, for example, Lyra Bastion, the Ouroboros, mechanical training will go crazy with the thing. The whole thing's just incredible. But Cole does have a pretty cool play in one of his favorite, I would say, pet cards at the moment, the Ucklute out of Tasia. Pretty sweet. We mentioned it earlier in the Basira configuration. But in this case, it still has that same ability. When it gains one or more boost, he gets to exhaust a card in reserve and at least prevents the harvest from getting active. But man, it's going to be hard to find a way to outstat on either expedition, let alone both.
Yeah, who needs Brass Bug Hive when you have the Repotter Otter unique as a trace, right? Just keep on producing your own Brass Bugs without any type of 6 cost or 5 cost permanent. And we do have another unique that I believe we saw somewhat earlier that just basically lets you put a card from your hand in reserve and resupplies. So yeah, a lot of Brass Bugs in the future here, and still 7 mana to work with, despite, I mean, just playing a large amount already. So Cole's gonna go throw out that Spindle Harvester that's gonna contest the hero side at least, and we'll see how the rest of this day goes. We're probably looking at a traced win, but you tried your best, Cole. We uh, we don't love you, but it's okay.
I still love Cole. The fact that he's choosing to play Yeti plus Aklut here for a very snowy themed monsters Tejo deck, still gotta love it. It's just I think a little bit outshined here by this Otter especially. I'm assuming the other uniques might also be pretty good. I do think Axiom Salvager, the being able to put a card from hand into reserve and then resupply from anywhere, super awesome for enabling that traced hero ability, for example. Traced is actually a super cool deck now. I'm excited to see what changes when Haven comes back into the game in a slightly updated form. because I guess since that suspension of Haven, we really haven't seen much of the deck at all outside of players like Freeloader occasionally playing it still. But it's been night and day the number of trace we were seeing compared to seeing now. And yeah, this is one of these configurations though that definitely still had some life to it after that suspension.
Yeah, it's definitely been fun to see the variety of the traced lineups on the deck list thus far and what people can manage with it. One of the early ones that I thought was pretty fun was the use of the rare Keylon cylinder and essentially trying to get those boosts in a different fashion. And of course, we have some folks out there, won't name any names, that have fun uniques that essentially do the same thing as the Haven Bravos Bastion.
Yep.
So, yeah, either way, we're looking at a 1 for 1 here. Cole makes it close, but not quite close enough, and we will see a trace victory, courtesy of a quite fun Repotter Otter from Trial by Frost. As we switch back here, want to thank everyone that has joined us thus far. We are only in the first round of the Swiss, and there's just
Ah,
so
that's round
many of
two
you.
now.
Yeah, we're just finishing round 1 at this point, and there's just so many of you chatting around and then just watching us in general, so we appreciate it. This is the AWOL Season 2 Wednesday Weekly number 6. We are just starting the Swiss round 2, as my co-caster has mentioned, so why don't we jump into another game? What are you looking at?
I saw there's a table. It is table 11, Zoa 54 against Shiro Kuroporo. Would love that one.
All right, we'll give them a second to join the table. In the meantime, just want to show everyone the little things that pop up below our names as far as current channels. Keylon Guy has a wonderful YouTube that is going to be featuring a lot of video content very soon, is what I'm told.
Absolutely, you got
Uh,
it.
and same thing with mine. I release a video every single Wednesday. Yes, that's right, every Wednesday. And I just released one today. If you want to catch up some stuff as far as the Alterdace's founder, known as Cletus, and his run at one of the recent events in France. You can take a look
Already
at that.
watched it in my little break between the No Unique Championship and AWOL. It was perfect timing to fit in a blue video. I highly recommend you fit in a blue video into your weekly schedule.
Yep, it in fact works out because I have one a week, so make it work.
Exactly.
But anyways, we do have a bit of a fun matchup. We've seen kind of a resurgence, I feel like, or at least people trying to make the Ysmir hero of Lindway in Maw work a bit, and I feel like it has had some type of resurgence in that fashion. While we do
Hmm.
see a Tasia on the bottom end here. I know you used to be a big Lindway fan. Haven't seen you play for much yet. Now, can you tell me, are we
Hmm.
going to see it come out at some point? Do you like it more here in Trial by Frost? What are some thoughts?
Yes, I think. Well, one, it's worth noting that the player we're seeing as Lindway in this game, Zoa 54, they are the reason for the Lindway resurgence. They had the first ever 6-0 finish with Lindway in a at least more serious online event. And ever since then, I think it's starting to get on people's radar again as potentially a good option, which is super sweet. Um, yeah, definitely excited to see what they're working with today with the deck. And for me personally, yes, I mean, I'm still very much committed to Aonis. If something changes there, especially, for example, along the lines of nerfs to the strategy, then you can absolutely expect that I will be probably trying out some Lindway at some points. I think there's some really cool things going on with this strategy that are incredibly strong. It's very hard for an opposing player to play into a Lindway on the basis of which side of the field you want to put your stats on, whether you're contesting hero side or companion side. Makes a big difference into a hero that can make that Maw token and start sacrificing things to sort of swap around where the stats lie. And oftentimes now, thanks to the inclusion of the new card from Trial by Frost, Moth Lantern, it's even more difficult to do so. I think one of the more classic lines from this new era of Lindway gameplay, you'll end up seeing a Moth Lantern get deployed while sacrificing a character on the hero side and putting stats onto the companion side Maw. And it ends up being such a strong line and very difficult for people to play around. So, yeah, hero's looking super sweet.
Yeah, definitely. And we do see an Aja come out here for the Tasia player, making me think that we may be looking at a fun little Hydra setup here for Tasia as a potential deck list that we don't get to see around too often. We do, however, get to see Starshine Simon ask a question in the chat of if we get that small step giant leap effectively non-existent
Mhm.
here once we get things set up, are you still playing Aonis? Are you finding a different way to play Aonis? What are your thoughts there?
It depends on the nerf specifically. If it was to get nerfed, I personally have been advocating for. I think Small Step Giant Leap should cost 9 mana. I think that's the right number because it is actually an achievable number of mana in the course of a game of Altered, but it isn't one of these more absurd things where you're able to just power through, cheese certain expeditions, and then win the game on the spot, which I think are the worst feels bad sort of scenarios. So I would like to see some change along those lines there. If that was the case, I would still be playing the deck most probably. I think that that card would then still be playable, just not as absurd. And chances are I would change the number of them in my deck from 3 to 2. But again, that's still theoretical, I guess, at this point. If Small Step Giant Leap was truly functionally unplayable, I think that Afana strategies could still be totally fine. I think you would just likely have to change a few things around. It's also worth noting, though, that Lindway would also get a pretty big hit from that, considering that they also play two, and it is a relevant part of their game plan. Oftentimes, Lindway in the past has been a very control centric style deck. And I do think that this is a deck that can absolutely abuse Small Step Giant Leap in aggressive configurations as well at the moment. Of course, Small Step, really important for more like control Izmir as well. But especially these decks that are able to contest early, cards like Chrysalis are actually really good at the early contesting because they both give your opponent a question as to whether they want to try to advance through them. And if they choose not to, there will still be a Mana Moth hanging around for the next turn. And then sometimes there are cards like Mobile Armory at rare being played now that actually prevent that defender from activating, essentially, as in it allows them to advance despite having the defender on the Chrysalis. So the deck is actually surprisingly aggressive. It's not the sort of thing you might think of when you're looking at a Lindway list, but this one can be pretty fast.
Yeah, currently behind a little bit on the tumult here, trying to make things work. They do have 3 mana left, with 3 cards left in hand, 1 card in reserve, that Chrysalis that you had mentioned before. I'll be curious to see how things play out in general. We do have a fun little Baba's Isba getting ready for the Linda Way player, so not looking too bad there. We'll just have to see how they are able to work things out. Can still activate that Maw if they so choose, but don't necessarily have to at this point. So we'll see how things go. But in the meantime, still an early game. Small Step Giant Leap still exists and is not nerfed into the ground or anything that we may see in the future. So, plenty of time for that Lindaway player that you have mentioned thus far that has done quite well on their own to be able to come back from being down one early. And we do see quite a few other options available.
Yeah, that Chrysalis being played out now. It's always an interesting card in general, especially with a Baba's Isba in play, because sometimes it can actually represent a lot of sudden stats. But in this case, it's pretty clearly telegraphed. They're not going anywhere with it. They're just setting it up so that next turn they will start with a character in play, which is sweet. Also worth noting, that is a rare Moonlight Jellyfish that's in play. At least the last time that this player was playing this deck, they actually had a split between common and rare. The upside of the rare being it has this ability, if it's fleeting at the point when it is sacrificed, you get to draw a card. Lindaway doing okay in terms of card access right now, at least, but getting some little extra advantage there when they're sacrificing things is definitely actually pretty important.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I like to ask different folks and different people as a whole as far as the opportunities of splitting common and rare cards when you're not sure on how you want to set them up in your deck list, and just general overall preferences. Like one of the fun little setups that I've seen a lot, even from Sigmar players lately, is switching off of rare Ortis troopers
Mhm.
sometimes onto common ones, just facilitating the idea of the 1/1/1 still isn't bad, and sometimes you just wanna play a character or you have other rare slots you may want to fill with that rare slot. So, yeah, it's fun getting to see those splits, and then eventually I feel like as the season progress, we see people prioritize and go one way or the other a little bit instead of splitting once they found out that sweet spot that, you may or may not get along the way. So, just fun altogether as we see that fun Moth Lantern that you mentioned at the beginning of game produce 2 moth.
Moth, yes, indeed. Yeah, Tasia did have a pretty strong play there, at least setting up a aloe vera while they're on the correct expedition for it. But yeah, exactly. This is what I expected to see here, which is a boom going after it. So there will be no aloe vera sticking around for another turn here, which is a nice thing at least, and that should also give them a progression on that hero. I'm sorry, that companion side as well through it. Notably, though, they're not going to be able to do much to contest on that hero side, despite that Moth Lantern did make those two moths as you mentioned. But unless something changes, oh, interestingly, they are going for that unique kitsune that did have the potential to anchor other things again at dusk. Instead of the aloe vera, I was assuming they were going to go for the card advantage play there in the aloe vera. But yeah, it seems like they're very much worried about the kitsune just keeping things around forever.
Yeah, I was curious to see if they were gonna end up targeting that opposed to the aloe vera. I think either would have been an okay play. I guess we are not the ones that know their deck the best, so I'm sure they're trying to decide a little bit on their own there. There was a little bit of a pause to decide if that's what they were going to do. So we'll see how it ends up turning out for them. Still behind one on the tumult
Mhm.
for this game of the Swiss round two. Both players have a fair amount of cards available to them, whether that be in hand or in the reserve for the Tasia. So a lot of game left to play, and they're gonna start off with a resupply courtesy of the aloe vera.
Yeah, definitely. And it does show off a pretty good card for Tasia here in this Spindle Munibastion. You have to assume at some point the Izmir player is going to find some removal, whether that is Off You Go or another copy of Boom, for example. And that just makes these cards way, way worse. Interestingly, it looks like the removal that's coming out really doesn't care about that sort of effect and is just going to say, no, you sacrifice that now, Mr. Tasia. And yeah, that ends up being a pretty decent opportunity for them to potentially take an advantage in this turn. That's both going to create a moth on that hero side, thanks to the Moth Lantern, um, and uh, and then also Maw getting boosted off of it as well. The double sacrifice there, pretty sweet. The extra moth, getting a couple cards out of it. It's really sweet, unique. And now we're seeing Chiron come out, another unique for the Tasia. This one being a just essentially a boost unique. No anchored coming out of this guy. Just a lot of potential stats, especially if they're able to anchor it somehow and keep it around for subsequent turns. But even if it doesn't manage to do that, does represent potential various ways for them to potentially advance through the crazy amount of moths this turn. But another unique coming out now for our Lindway player in this Katagiran Alchemist. Looks pretty strong. It gives itself a couple boosts thanks to them having a landmark. It has an effect when they play a spell, they can discard a card from reserve and give something fleeting. But then otherwise, it also has the when played from anywhere, again with the landmark restriction, controlling one or more landmarks, it gains two boosts. That's a nice 4/4/5 for three. And from reserve, it'll be a 2/2/3 for two, which is pretty decent. I'm not sure if something's wrong on my end, but I cannot hear you.
Blah, blah, blah. Good, good, good. Alright,
Now
perfect.
I can hear you. Yes, there
Yeah,
we are.
anyway, yeah, so 3 uniques there in a row. Been waiting for those Muna players to utilize similar types of uniques that we see on the Chiron there, specifically with the idea of something like a Quetzalcoatl and having something constantly join as far as, characters are concerned. Haven't seen it yet, but could be fun. And then those Katagir and Alchemist uniques, man, whether
Mhm.
they're in Bravos or Ysmir, they just always seem to come up with something quite crazy in general. So always fun to see the different effects that those come up with. As far as uniques are concerned, we do see the Lindway player make the advances that they need that they didn't get previously to only be two away at this point, despite being down early. So seems like they knew what they were doing when they started off and removing that kitsune that we mentioned earlier, and only potentially only one advance and a small step away from taking this game.
No, yeah, you're totally right, and I I really think that was off the back of that play with the Anubis there. The ability to both sacrifice, their own character, but get rid of the opposing aloe vera for one, and then also be able to sacrifice an additional character and draw a couple cards off of it, putting so much stats on the board on both sides, both with that Maw token, but also because the fact that they had that Moth Lantern in play from the turn before, able to set up 2 moths for the same effect. That's just the sort of crazy plays that these Lindway lists can actually manage now. We are seeing Tasia play out this Hydra at rare as well, so this thing is going to be incredibly hard to remove. Currently having tough 5 thanks to that Spindle Munibastion. That thing is not removable anymore. Even Boom cannot hit it now, which is kind of awesome.
Yeah, and we do run into the Hydrocana that we potentially thought was going to come, especially after seeing an Aja show up going towards some ramp. Probably also looking at some variation of maybe even Tiny Gen in this deck list. Who knows? I don't, because I haven't seen one. But yeah, cool to see them. Excited that some Tasia players have been messing with it a little bit to try to make it work. It's hasn't been always a super competitive option in
Mhm.
season 1 at least, but it to me, I like it even though I don't like Muna because it draws a lot of especially new players to make them excited about the game because
Mhm.
they see big character, they see it stays around forever, and they see the idea of, man, I can get it up to 20 or something to that effect, right? So anytime someone can make something like that work, whether it's the Hydrocana or the Kaibara, I'm happy to see it. But we'll see if they're able to prevent the Lindaway from small stepping here in this next day and try to compete. But I'm too not too promising with the amount of cards in hand. But who knows? I could be wrong.
I agree, and it's also just so hard here, given that all of their characters are going to be on the one side to start off the turn with, as well, with the Sneezer Shroom also being on that hero side. They have to contest on both in order to win. There is potential still for the Lindaway to go over on over that Hydrocana, believe it or not, even in terms of stats the upcoming turn. But it's virtually, I think it's pretty clear both players are going to be trying to optimally stack stats rather onto the companion side at this point. Lindaway only needing that side in order to win, and that's again assuming they don't have small step to win it pretty quickly. Um, and frankly, they're just going to have a ton of characters to sacrifice, most likely, to really buff up Maw, largely thanks to the fact that they already are sitting with a Moth Lantern in play, which is definitely helpful.
And a Belisenka coming out here for the Linda Way, probably hitting the biggest card that they could as far as preventing a bunch of stats stacking up with that
Mhm.
unique Chiron. So it is going to be quite difficult for the Tasia, even without a small step giant leap play from the Linda Way, to catch up with only having one other card in hand to fight for that companion side. If this was a arena tiebreaker, I'd also be quite upset because that's essentially what it is at this point,
Yeah,
companion side. So, one card left to play. Let's see if they can manage something crazy with all that mana. It's a mana reaping. Not sure if that's
yeah.
gonna be enough, but good game nonetheless.
Yeah, I was thinking for a second maybe the only shot was for Lindway to misplay and make the Maw a little bit early, and for the last card from the Tasia to be something like a Beauty Sleep, both like Sleep the Maw and whatever other character is on that side. But no, it looks like there's just plenty of characters from Lindway at this point. Cool seeing these common Belasenkas. I don't know whether or not they were playing at least multiple of them. There were two played out here, which is kind of awesome. But yeah, not sure as to whether or not that's a typical include for them, but it actually, pretty sweet card, and not super used to seeing that in many places. So that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I was kind of hesitant when the set initially was announced with the exhaust mechanic as a whole. Just thinking to my hoity-toity self that, wow, why would I want to exhaust when I can sabotage? Right? But it's definitely been something that has been quite effective. It kind of makes players play a lot more from hand when they thought they were going to play from reserve, and they end up having to
Mhm.
get cards anyway at that end of the day because they overload in reserve a lot of the time. So fun to see even the common versions of those Belasenkas do work for the Lindaway player. As we go back here, currently still in the Swiss round two of the AWOL season two Wednesday weekly number six. Plenty of games left to go for today. So I want to thank everyone that has joined us thus far. Let's see what else we got. Few games.
Maybe table 15, Rosscat 95 against Bravo for Bravos.
Just same mind. I was looking at this exact same one. So table
Yes.
15, bravo for Bravos. Always can appreciate a fun name when someone comes up with it. Let's switch over here. And Bravo for Bravos is in fact playing a Bravos here. I was about to be disappointed when I saw the Sigmar, but either way, we got it. And we do have a Sigmar on the bottom here. Running low on time for the Bravos player, though. We'll have to see if that
Yeah.
becomes a factor, especially in these early rounds.
Definitely some interesting card choices as well. Scotty, not necessarily the most popular, but it definitely is seen here and there in these Kojo lists. Rare Tomoe Gozen, definitely very uncommon. Sometimes the common is played, and the difference between that common and rare being that the common has the requirement of you having to have 7 mana orbs, and the rare just requires you to have 6. But definitely not a super common rare slot in the Bravos deck. But they are playing at least two of them here at Rare, which is pretty cool. Maybe they have a strategy with that I haven't seen before. But yeah, as otherwise, it's business as usual, it seems, for our Sigismar player. It looks like a pretty standard list with the one exception of field reinforcements. We're seeing that a little bit more often here and there, but otherwise looks reasonably standard and leveraging that cool card Rallying Call that we mentioned earlier. So that's pretty sweet. And yeah, Magic Slay getting played out for our Bravosi hero here. Um, yeah, that is definitely a cool one, threatening to move additional times. But in this case, the Sandman is just going to shut that strategy right down.
Yeah, the beauty of being able to slow play a little bit and having additional resources as the Sigismar player, making the Bravos player show their hand a little bit earlier than what you want to when you're running that Magic Slay on occasion. But yeah, that'll probably be all she wrote at this point. Do you want to come back to that Scotty that you mentioned before? Feel like there is in a lot of these Kojo deck lists trying to find that last common slot of a 2
Mhm.
to 3 cost character that they wanna include. I've seen some Scotties. I've
Mhm.
seen a variety of things. I've seen the reduction of Haven Bouncer quite a lot
Yeah.
comparative to season 1, where we pretty much always saw 3 copies of it involved. Have you seen I know you don't necessarily play quite as much as far as Bravos is concerned. Is there a specific card that you think works best against you when you're playing against them?
Yeah, I mean, last I was playing a lot of Bravos was January, and Kojo specifically at that point, and a lot of the new cards were not available yet at that point as well. At which point, it was much more clear which cards were good enough to play and which weren't. Haven Bouncer, definitely good enough to play. I would say, though, some things are changing as far as those dynamics. Sometimes just 3 mana for a sabotage isn't really the exchange rate that you're looking for, and for that reason, I can understand why it's not necessarily the priority. I think it's a little bit more popular in a deck like Basira, where the fact that it will get that innate boost when you play it again from reserve, definitely a little bit more relevant in some circumstances. Overall, I think it's a good card. It's just not the way it used to be, like a necessary auto include anymore, is what I would say.
Definitely. I went ahead and go to table 27 at this point that I'll switch over here. One of the ones that had little less percentage in general. I believe this is a Finn, another Finn festival. Was this one of the ones that we had watched at the very beginning? It
Yeah,
may
this
be.
is this is Iron Arma's Fun Festival, the
Yeah,
Silent
exactly.
Knights. Yep. And
And
the
we do,
Joyride.
yeah, and the Joyride. We do have two festivals currently available to
Hmm.
them, but they will get hit by that teamwork training, so they'll need at least one more character to make things work. And the fact that they're hitting that Kodama will make it a little bit more difficult. We do see the classic inclusion of the Sigismars of the Ebenezer Scrooge. Everyone has been using that lately. Um, you watch my video, you know why I'm mentioning it. But either way, it's not a bad card. You get some stats, you get some ability to sleep a character on your side of things, and it gets up to 4 cost, which is a fun little inclusion as far as a support ability when we typically see the anchor to up to 3 cost. I'd be curious as far as like a Equinox development side of things, why they
Hmm.
decided to increase the hand cost there, for a sleep support ability opposed to a anchoring support ability. Kind of makes sense, I think, but fun to see how that works out.
Huge. We just saw Silent Night win a game of Altered right here, right now. That was super sweet. In general, it was actually a really cool turn. Even if the Lyra Festival hadn't been in play, that Silent Night would have meant that their Aloe Vera would get to stick around for another turn regardless, and they would still be winning on the hero side. So that was cool to begin with. But the fact now, Kodama just gets to put anchored on the Anansi, and that is a festival win. So that's pretty cool.
Easy win with the Silent Night. Why doesn't everyone run it? And the game immediately ends, as is tradition, at dusk when you're having a party with the festival. We should be pretty close to the end of this round, a fairly quick round, I believe, comparatively. So we'll see what we have going on here. If anything that we can jump into really quick as I scroll through real quick, I believe we only have one game that we might be able to catch the end of here on table 7, depending. Switch over for you lovely folks. And it does look like it just ended. So we'll go ahead and go back, JK, as we get into the Swiss round 3 of the AWOL Season 2 Wednesday Weekly number 6. I am Blue, courtesy of Blue Oak TV on YouTube. This is my co-caster, the Keelan guy. Say hi.
Hello again. Again, I'm at Killon Guy on YouTube. I'm less of a good YouTuber as Blue is, but I try my best sometimes.
He tries his best sometimes. That's all we can ask for, really. But
Right?
he's quite a good player, and he can talk a few things about Altered, which is probably why we have him here at the moment.
I
We are
appreciate it.
we are going into round 3 at this point. First one that caught my eye was just table 5. It's starting now,
Mhm.
so I'm gonna go
Awesome.
straight to it.
Yeah, we have Caseno from, I believe that is the Bootcamp X Altered, and they're playing against Tempête de la Neige from Team Altered Aces, who actually just won the No Unique Championship week 1. So that's pretty cool. I assume though that for this AWOL, they're playing their uniques again.
Nah, they're trying to see how far they can get. Once upon a time, early AWOL days, there were players that didn't play any uniques and they still got top eights. I want to see some people do it again. I want to see people bring out the Sigmar starter deck again. That would uh that would be impressive, you know. I want to
That's
see
true.
someone top up with the Sigmar starter deck. But either way, we're waiting for some game art, it looks like, as this game loads up. In the meantime, want to thank everyone that has joined us thus far in the chat. Be sure to subscribe to the AWOL channel if you have not already. Got a lot of fun stuff and games to go here left in season 2. And then in the meantime, if you are listening and you can type in chat, why don't you go and tell me which faction you're trying to get Kurokami for here in season two? Personally, I wouldn't mind if Ordis got it.
And as a Sigismar hater, I would be happy with any faction other than Ordis getting it. So let's go. We have a mixed bag here on the casting desk today.
And we do jump into the game here with an Aonis v Finn. Finn, quite the popular Lyra hero as we come into Trial by Frost. Who needs Navenka anymore until potentially we watch a Gamma Knight game?
No, you're totally right there. Notably, the rare category and Mage Dancer being played out from Tempet definitely threatens to, over time, draw some additional cards, just part of the normal gameplay strategy of Afanis. I think the big question becomes whether they end up in positions where they end up having to overstat onto it for that boost ability, in which case sometimes removal can come in pretty clutch and actually cause some problems for the Afanis. So yeah, definitely interesting. I'm wondering where they're getting the rare slots for it in this case, or what they're playing that's a little bit different than some other lists to make sure they have access to that rare, or if they're playing the full set or just the one, for example. We were talking a little bit earlier about playing those split common and rare copies of certain cards, and Mage Dancer is definitely one that you can play at either.
Yeah, we do see a Magpin Hoarder come out here, and it has the ability from hand. If you have two or more cards in reserve, you may return a card, which we do see there from the Fin. And then from reserve, roll a die. On 4 plus, you return a spell from your reserve to your hand. So just utilizing as much of the return as possible for a fairly low cost in that unique, and not using the traditional Magpin ability. Well, just in a different way, I guess, instead of getting boosts.
Yeah, totally right. I think it's really nice for Afanis here in this turn specifically that at least for the cards that we see that Fen has access to in the reserve, the Afanis is on excellent expeditions to find advances anyway, and is threatening a double advance here just with the cards that we see. If there's something different in Fen's hand, of course, that'll change up the dynamic a little bit. But yeah, just still being on double water for Afanis, definitely a huge leg up when the stats turn out the way they do sometimes for Lyra heroes. But yeah, these Magpeng Hoarder uniques pretty strong. I believe they actually have a super sweet Alice unique as well, with some character discard on it. At least if they're playing the same list that they won the Ace this past Sunday with. So yeah, that's a very strong Fen player over there.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of prevalence shown towards Finn and Lyra heroes in general, towards uniques that have some type of removal associated with it. I think it's a fairly good idea, especially on the Finn side of things, that you can just play something associated with that as far as uniques are concerned. One of the Lyra players that I've played against at my locals that prefers that strategy is someone that has been playing some of the AWOL events every so often in all of the
Mhm.
markets. Um,
Oh yeah, nice.
and he is a big Finn fan. And I know if I ever have a question as it comes to limited or something like that, I can hit him up because I think he plays more limited than any amount of person I've ever seen, especially in North America. So
Marbles is a great constructed player in general, though. Not only on Fen, I've seen them bounce around on other things, but definitely the Fen play pretty strong. Hero, honestly, looking pretty good into the new set. I think there's definitely a couple different configurations you can go with it. More character focused, more spell focused. This one specifically is definitely a magical training abusing configuration of Fen. It's maybe the best card in their deck the way they've built their deck around it.
yeah, we did also see that Off You Go, in their deck list as well as far as the rare out of faction, correct? Or did I
Yep.
miss that?
No,
So
you got it. Mhm.
yeah, so, yeah, definitely something they could also cycle there in addition to that magical training as far as low-cost cards from hand that just help maintain either the board state or the card advantage, which you always wanna do as Finn, and, see how things turn out, but we do see a unique come out here for the Afanis, that has seasoned, and when I go to the reserve from the Expedition Zone, if I have two or more boosts, you may return a spell from your reserve to your hand in the unique red.
Yeah, this is a super sweet red, and I want to caution people who look at this ability and read it goes to reserve from the expedition zone, therefore bad, and two or more boosts, therefore bad. This is a one mana play from reserve that combos off with Helping Hand in a absurd way. This is specifically trying to abuse people who do not have sabotage effects, and plays so well with Helping Hand like you wouldn't believe. This is a really, really strong play just for one mana from reserve. I can totally see why they're playing it.
Yeah, it's been fun seeing like the different unique reds also that some people
Yeah.
utilize in Afanis when you don't necessarily or you don't have or you don't utilize those spindle harvesters that have been
Hmm.
kind of a commonplace from the top end of Afanis decks. But anytime someone can throw something different as far as uniques are concerned, it always makes people think twice and raise their prices on the marketplace of the community about $200.
Man, you just know always the words to say to trigger something in my mind that makes me go grrr. Yeah, no, you totally got that. Some of these reds are pretty absurd, and I know another one that this player has access to is particularly sweet as well. That has the ability to discard permanents as well. It's definitely one of the stronger effects on these red uniques sometimes that we're seeing that still have the spell looping ability that we come to understand is probably the best way of playing uniques in Izmir at the moment, but also with the ability to start looping permanent destruction that can sometimes change some problematic matchups. I wouldn't say it goes so far as to actually make Sigismar favorable or anything, but it is the sort of thing where Grand Endeavor, for example, becomes a lot less good into the matchup when there is actual potential for advancing the turn a Grand Endeavor is played and getting rid of the Grand Endeavor. So it depends. Sometimes it can hit them pretty hard, and I do like those the certain red uniques for that reason exactly.
Yeah, it's always fun to see people utilize different effects in different ways for
Hmm.
uniques that aren't necessarily the traditional ones.
Yep.
Being able to remove certain cards from their deck to open up other slots just purely based off of uniques. And honestly, that makes Altered as a game fun in general. I've seen, I forget who did it, but there was a fun Sierra list running three Walrus Scouts that had
Mm.
some fun effects that made Sierra quite good if everything goes well. But yeah,
I
just
think I
just
ran into that on the ladder the other day. It was
yeah,
pretty funny.
yeah. I believe it only ran like 5 or 6 characters, including those Walrus Scouts, but either way, still fun. We do see that Twinkle Twinkle pop out, and as someone in the chat mentioned, yeah, if you're sleeping that red, it's not gaining that ability when it goes to the reserve, so not a bad play whatsoever.
Yeah, totally. That definitely being the upside of running into a unique like this instead of a at dusk, for example, style of spell return unique is that your sleep spells get a lot more life to them, where they're suddenly not just continuing to provide your opponent with more and more card advantage. Instead, it actually gets you an expedition win and prevents the spell return ability, which given that there is a magical training in reserve, that was likely to be pretty sweet for the Afanis player. So definitely good line there. Interested to see where this cloth cocoon might end up finding some life in this game. Oftentimes, Afanis configurations do have anchored characters to play between certain uniques, but also sometimes sneezer shrooms. But in this case, I don't believe they're playing any of those, so they might actually struggle to find a good way to use a card like cloth cocoon.
Yeah, we do see a Muna Caregiver pop out here in the unique form for the Afanis that's just going to straight up draw a card when played, and then it also has a secondary effect from reserve where you may put a card from your hand in your reserve. If it's a spell, you may return a card from your reserve to your hand. Um, Not the craziest one we've seen, but still quite effective if you make it work for you. So, gotta love card draw for 2 mana.
Yeah, it's exactly what I was going to say. At the end of the day, drawing cards, not bad. Yeah, so definitely pretty reasonable there. Also worth noting that it does have that classic Muna caregiver support ability to give something anchored, and sometimes that can come up really huge for an Aphanis player, being able to anchor a character that's gotten a bunch of boosts, for example, that continues to stick around. Worth noting again, they are playing those rare Katagiran mage dancers that we mentioned earlier, so that is of course a priority target for something like that, but they're never going to cash in on that until they see that this cloth cocoon won't be an option to answer it at that point. And now seeing this Tooth Fairy go after the Aloe Vera, which was very well telegraphed as a potential upcoming play for the Fen, given that 4 mana, or access to 4 mana, or potentially, I guess, 5 with that Ouroboros Inkcaster that we see sitting in reserve, definitely was threatening to spend 4 of it to make an anchored Aloe Vera. So getting rid of that now potentially means that the Aphanis might not be working with the removal that they would otherwise want to fire off on the Aloe, but otherwise it's just good timing and get rid of it.
Yeah, definitely. And one other thing I wanted to mention, going back a little bit, as far as sleeping characters, whether they be uniques or not, that have effects of going to reserve, going to sleep, or maybe you just don't want to see them play their from anywhere abilities at any point.
Hmm.
Want to give a shout out to Simon, that I assume is listening at this point. I did watch a game or two between you and my co-caster, and I am pretty sure at one point he beauty slept your Hua Mulan about 6 times, so you couldn't replay it again, and it got really big, to the point of you just couldn't do anything about that. So, yeah, just a little fun fact there, and I know Keelan guy enjoyed that as well. Either way, going back to the game at
Oh
hand,
my god.
we have a equal game on the tumult, equal resources as far as hand and reserve, somewhat, but looking quite good, I would have to say, for the Afanis player.
I totally agree with you. Um, Definitely the nice upside though for Fen still is that they're not just going to be dead to a potential small step giant leap coming out. Hathor having that support ability to pick up another card means that they are likely to maintain some card advantage over these next couple turns. But that red just being so threatening here, meaning that the next turns are going to be really strong, regardless of whether they pick up that magical training or off you go. One of those things being removal, that's going to be just effective in general. The other one being a good way to pass back with an after you style effect to the Fen player and get maximum information before having to do much of anything. That's looking pretty strong overall.
Yeah, still 2 mana left here at this point for the Finn player, to decide if they wanna do anything, and they also have the ability to do some cost reduction if they so choose, with the support ability of the Ouroboros Inkcaster, which is what we'll see, and we'll see the rare, common Hathor play from reserve. Don't see it that often, but you know what? When you have stats and you wanna advance, why not?
Yeah, definitely. I would say in general, advancing is pretty good. You want to do that whenever possible, and being able to do so here, definitely a good thing. Really interesting will be to see what cards are being gotten rid of and which cards are sticking around in reserve. Sometimes there are situations where you actually get rid of uniques in these stages of the game, but I have a feeling there's going to be more prioritizing of having just characters to play here. And yeah, they do end up choosing that. Of course, red being the obvious choice of what would guaranteed stick around. But I did think for a second there was a small chance that a card like Off You Go might be sticking around in reserve, picking back up the magical training and keeping the red as well. Sometimes that is optimal, but yeah, I like the line here. Looks like there is going to be reasonably strong turn for Afanas still, but gotta say though, starting off with a magical training from Fen, that's an equally strong play.
Yeah, one of the cards we did see get resupplied there for the Finn player is the Snowman. I've seen that pop up occasionally here for Finn, and also I've seen it pop up for fun sometimes in the out of faction rare for Bravos as well. So always fun to see the occasional new card from Trial by Frost. I know we've had it for like a month or so now, but I'm still like getting the idea of all these new cards into decks. People have been holding tight to their Beyond the Gates cards in their deck lists, and they're finally letting themselves free up a little bit. with those Trial by Frost cards and trying new things. It doesn't hurt, you know. Just go out, taste things, and make things work for you. But in the meantime, we will see the fun Category and Mage Dancer pop up for the Aonis, and responded with a sleight of hand, because why not get that magical training back to hand?
Yeah, this is so good. This is what this Fen player does best is looping magical training. And it turns out when you're able to put cards from your hand that have these really nice support abilities, the way that Twinkle Twinkle does, for example, yeah, things can be really good for you. That's a super synergistic card into the Fen archetype. Super, I'm a big fan of it. Um, but I must say as well, though, that category in Mage Dancer, really nice. It's a good play here. It's going to contest well on stats, pretty much regardless of what the Fen still has in hand, with the exception of potentially a Nancy, but even then, committing that to the Companion Expedition at this point, it's likely not going to be good enough on its own still. And yeah, the Aonis still has access to that 1 mana play of the 3/3/3 red at this point. I do think at the moment they're just trying to prevent it from getting cloth cocooned, which is why we haven't seen that come out yet as a play. But yeah, all things said and done, I think I have a feeling this is going to be an advantageous turn for Afanas, but I could definitely see various ways how Fen will be able to turn this into at least a 1 for 1 here. Um, it's just yeah, to which to what level will each player get more and more value out of this turn? I think is really going to be the big question about who takes a lead here.
Yeah, always got to be careful with those Finn players. Multiple cards in reserve, cost reduction, all those lines of plays. You never know what they can come up with. They're quite tricky. It's not always so black and white to figure things out, especially when they just play one cost cards like that, even though they're 1/1/1s after that dice roll, that could just leave more and more options for open for them. And less and less for the Afonis after they have to play more and more cards. We may even just see that Moon a Caregiver out for a draw or something from hand to keep on boosting up that Mage Dancer that is the rare. So they will see a draw after we go to the end of the day here. But the question is, in the meantime, um, who can keep on advancing? I would have to say, not sure if they run it in this deck list, but the Finn may be running a small step giant leap in the out of faction as well. You seem to be aware of the deck list a little bit?
Yeah, I think they do play one copy. Although to be fair, I wouldn't be surprised if they're not playing any. I don't think it's I don't think it's a necessary include for Fen. I do just think though the amount of times that it will occasionally be good justifies the first copy virtually always. It's hard to justify more copies though at the moment, especially given that it is a rare. If it was a common in their deck, the way it is for Izmir, potentially it would easily slot into some more options. But yeah, they are playing one. I can confirm that.
Got it. And yeah, Mitch in the chat, this is round 3 of the Swiss currently of the weekly number 6 Wednesday event. If you're not aware of what day it is, or if you've had a really rough last night and you thought you might have skipped a day or two, it is in fact Wednesday. Or it could be Thursday, depending on what time zone you're in, like my co-caster here. So
That's true.
um, it is a lot of other cards being played here. We do see an Off You Go played, and we will see a cost reduction coming out from the Twinkle Twinkle to
Ooh.
play that aloe vera with the anchor, prioritizing some resources and getting an advance at the same time.
Yep, totally. But yeah, that Muna Caregiver getting activated for that anchor ability, and that sticks around on the Katagarin Mage Dancer, which means that they will draw a card this turn and threaten a lot of either potential to progress the next turn, but otherwise the potential to draw more cards the next turn as well. Yeah. Overall, though, I think I might actually be a bigger fan of the Fens spot in this game as it stands. The one main risk being Afanis does have a higher chance of hitting Small Step Giant Leap in their deck, but Fen's spot is honestly really good. They're working with a ton of resources. Afanis down to just 1 card in hand. Of course, they're going to be drawing back up to 2. But yeah, I think overall it's looking all right for Fen. Cloth Cocoon is likely to be able to find a target to actually hit that might be of relevance this upcoming turn. And yeah, they do indeed choose to keep that one around. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, that cloth cocoon has been sticking around for quite some time at this point, being that ever present threat for the Aonis player, especially for that unique red that they have waiting in the reserve that I'm sure they would like to play at any point now to start returning some spells if possible, and if also they have a helping hand available to them. But they'll have to wait it out here and see if they can outplay that cloth cocoon. And realistically, I'm pretty sure that same magical training that we've seen played quite a few times so far this game due to some card return. But yep, both
Mm,
players are even on the tumult, two away per, and each of them have a character out from the previous day. Two cards in hand, two cards in the reserve, a lot of game left to play, and why not have two more cards for the Finn because of some abilities that activate at noon?
true. It's funny because Hatter here, sort of a little bit of a brick in the sense that, yeah, it does give them the potential to anchor something here again, like that aloe vera potentially again. Just the main concern really is that if they do choose to play that on the hero expedition, it doesn't prevent the Afanis from moving forward, and the same goes on the companion side, where the Mage Dancer both outstats it already, but also will move forward on water regardless. Otherwise, I would say actually the Hatter is interestingly one of the better threats sometimes against Afanis. Because of the lack of banishing gates that we've been seeing out of these lists in many situations, and some players cutting down on their copies of Beauty Sleep as well, meaning that the main removal that Afanis is often working with is just Off You Go, which notably does not hit 4 mana characters. But in this case, it's not super likely to be relevant, largely just based on how the expeditions have lined up thus far. So that's definitely interesting. I think it's cool seeing the Martingale come out here onto that companion side. Definitely does threaten that if there is good removal or cards like Twinkle Twinkle, they would be able to threaten a progression on that companion side as well. And yeah, at this point, I think Afanis is just trying to pass back as many times as possible to try to get maximum information and not commit something that does just end up getting them double slept for a potential victory for the Fen.
Indeed, we'll have to see how that turns out for both players at this point. Each of them can surprise the other with some fun removal and potentially get a 2-0 if they so choose. But we will see that sleight of hand that has been of good use here for the Finn player to, I'm guessing, pick up the magical training again, as is tradition. But we'll see. They're taking some time here and to decide if that's what they want to do or not. In the meantime, we'll have to see what the Afanis will respond with. We did see them play earlier on in this day a Conjuring Seal. Speaking of Conjuring Seal, when did Afanis players find out that it was good? I know everyone loves Draw, but it feels like at the beginning of season one, no one wanted to play it.
Couple players were actually still on 2 copies, I believe. I think even some of the original lists from players like Skycrier, who definitely was responsible for some of the popularity of the deck, or most of it in many cases. I believe he was actually playing 1 or 2 as well. At this point, though, I think some people have gone off of it and trimmed copies of it. I'm personally super positive about this card. I think it's looked better and better for me. I'm up to 3 copies in my own list. I think it's excellent. Sometimes there are some really absurd things you get to do with it. Sometimes you end up in an Afanis mirror, and this card is deceptively incredible in Izmir mirrors. When you are able to just get more cards than your opponent, you are going to have more of what you need when you need it, and that lets you set up better snowballs. Afanis is very much a snowball deck in many cases, and so that's one of the best things you can be doing with it. Other times, it's just about digging you to what you need. Sometimes that's a small step. The card's really good for that. And then other times, you're really worried about card advantage. Sometimes into Fen, there are strategies like looping acapella trainings, giving all of your characters fleeting and driving your opponent out of resources. Conjuring Seal and other cards like it make it very hard to do so. Sometimes you also run into cards like Baku, whether that's out of Izmir or out of Axiom. I have seen it in Axiom recently, which is a little strange, but hey, cool new tech, I guess. And yeah, this card makes Baku feel terrible. So definitely, yeah, it's a good one. I love me some common Conjuring Seal.
Yeah, we get in the chat, Skycrier being the GOAT. Yep, Skycrier, the original Faunus GOAT. Interviewed him once upon a time, if you want to watch my old videos, by the way. Right after the the 1,000 player tournament that was the big thing on the scene after season 1 had started. It is fun with this game in particular, seeing the Finn player being able to outmaneuver a little bit the Aonis player as far as low cost cards and making them play before they see anything that's going to happen. They do finally have the option to take care of that red if they so choose. I'll be curious if they want to spend that 3 mana with the cloth cocoon to take it out, or if they're just gonna let it go here, at least for this turn, and see what Afonis can respond with the remaining 2 mana, and they'll just go ahead and get rid of it and not even worry about what Afonis is gonna respond with.
Yeah, the big question now is one of the last cards for the Iphanis a off you go? And it does appear to be a helping hand. So that one's actually going to be pretty strong just for the ability to stack stats and hopefully at least prevent a progression from Fen. But no, they're not going to be able to do so with this Hathor coming out here. That's sort of one of these best options, and yeah, really, really, really good in this spot. Will get them an expedition progression. They will keep that aloe vera around, rather thanks to that Hatter. Yeah, pretty good turn overall. And Faunus and Fen will both be discarding down to 2 cards left in the reserve. But yeah, now this is a small step, giant leap game, most likely, and Fen will be the first to act. So if they're able to find it either off of resupply or just natural draw, or a hero ability, yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. One downside definitely here for Finn is that they may in fact decide to mana a small step giant leap here. By decide, I mean you have no
Or
choice in the
forced
matter.
to. Yep.
Yeah, but we'll have to see how that turns out. The Afonis has recently drawn into 3 cards, including that Mage Dancer in the previous day. So we'll see if they can take advantage of that. We do not see a resupply into a small step for the Finn, so unless they have one in hand, we will likely not see that being played. But we do see a return of the Off You Go, which would definitely be beneficial, assuming that Afonis does not small step here.
No, it's true though. I would say that you don't get to be one of the best Fens the way Case Note is by putting your small step into mana. So I very much assume that they just haven't decided to put it into mana this game, and instead it's hanging out in the remaining 8 cards of their deck. Gotta believe. In any case, though, yeah, this turn is looking good for Afanis now. The way that Fen was really able to work their way through the last turn, get maximum information, it really looks so far, at least, like the Afanis might be able to do the same thing this turn. Having a potential just multiple easy 1 mana plays coming out of their reserve and the 2 cards in hand, that's looking really strong to me.
Yeah, so we do not see a small step at this point, leaving 6 mana open for the traditional BM play if they so choose, but I doubt we're going to see it. We do see a magical training from the Afanis, so maybe they are digging at this point to potentially take the game. We'll see, have to see if that's going to happen. We do see that Off You Go that was returned earlier to go ahead and hit that Spindle Harvester. And then Final Breath, they hit it. Oh my God, they hit it.
Oh
Oh,
man,
magical training OP. Oh,
yeah,
man.
brutal.
Unfortunate for the Finn player there. They pretty much had it in the bag, but then someone gets small stepped and a giant leap, and that's the game. We are still in round 3 of the Swiss. I want to thank everyone that has joined us thus far, that is chatting it up in the chat, talking about how great Skycrier is and is better than Elon on a Faunus. But past that, this is the AWOL Season 2, Wednesday Weekly, number 6. We'll see what we have left here. That game took a good amount of time, so we may not have too much left, but it does look like we have a few games.
Yeah, it's true. I've jumped in briefly to one between Mandarin PJ and Puppyette.
All right,
That was the
let's
trace that we saw earlier with the crazy uniques, but at the moment, looks like the Sierra of Mandarin might actually be a little bit in the driver's seat. They're both with just one expedition in between their hero and companion, so looking for a double advance to take it. Currently, Sierra has the dominant board presence, but I am a little bit worried here that especially given that traceability is very much active, that we could see some absurd things coming out.
Yeah, Reno, who is Skycrier? Some washed up player that I haven't even seen past, events. It's
He
crazy.
was playing Kojo most recently, from what I heard, right?
Yeah, I did actually see that at one point, and I was like, "Is he allowed to do
Yeah.
that? Is he allowed to betray Afonis players like that?" Yeah, I don't know. Either way, let's get back into this game in particular. We do have double Hive out for, the bottom Sierra here that you did mention. So we'll see have to see if that works out well for them here. It has to feel good stats-wise, but that Trace is just gonna keep on cycling here at this point with all those support abilities and see if they can find a answer to those hives and all those stats.
What this trace doing is just so terrifying, honestly. This is a really scary sort of thing where the trace can dig so many cards through their deck each turn that they're really able to get whatever they need specifically. And I think the big worry is them finding a unique along the lines of that Repotter otter that we saw earlier from them that was able to produce so many brass bugs, at which point they can likely contest on both expeditions, not just one. And yeah, the engine's just going to continue here. Ada Lovelace getting played out, puts a GN Assembly Overseer into reserve here, and they will just be able to continue the engine from there.
Yeah, we do have a mention in chat that they are about a minute away from losing due to time. We could have the good old fashioned wait 'em out play from the Sierra player on the bottom. I doubt they will do it, but it's always an option. You never know if you wanna scumbag it and you're listening, go for it. But we do see a bunch of recycling effects here just constantly happening. This was my favorite way to play Sierra in season one with Ouroboros Lyra Bastion.
Hmm.
Just throw those Inaris in there, throw those Jins in there, and just keep on cycling all day long until I find what I want to play and go through my
Yep.
entire deck while I'm at it. But we'll see what have to see what they have, and why not a harvest too? I mean, you've been doing all these resupplies anyway. Keep on doing it.
Yeah, this is this is absolutely absurd. I'm wondering here though, with them getting down to these low amounts of mana remaining, I'm wondering what they can actually hit at this point that will let them contest on either side. It's becoming really worrying, not just because they are 9 minutes in the negative in terms of their clock, but also just yeah, and there is the end of the game based on maximum time. But I don't know whether they would have actually been able to find something there that would let them contest enough. So that's yeah, rough.
Yeah, it's kind of the downside of that deck, and if you're not playing it quick, you have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of time to figure out what you're resupplying. Never mind, it's not a resupply. Ouroboros Lyra Bastion is out. It makes it not a resupply, just for everyone. So anyway, that is the end of round three, I believe, as far as the AWOL season two, Wednesday weekly number six. Once again, thank you for everyone that has joined us thus far. I am Blue. This is the Keylon guy. We're talking about some altered, and we're going into the Swiss round four. We're getting down to some undefeated folks potentially to watch. But you know what? Let's take a little bit farther look down the table line until we hit maybe round five and see get some other people on the stream. Anyone in particular making you want to watch?
Ah, that's a great question. It's funny hearing that both freeloaders playing something that is apparently a little non-standard. Apparently, Runfolk on Waru is 3-0 from what I hear.
Oh,
But
is he?
otherwise, if we're yeah,
Okay, no, we
um,
gotta watch that. We gotta watch that. Okay, so table three, Runfolk.
but I'm scared joining any Runfolk game. I don't know if I like what I'm signing myself up for.
Let's take a look what he's got going here. We'll join up with Runfolk as we potentially are taking a look at an undefeated Waru. I had seen Runefolk messing with Waru recently, so it was only a matter of time before we saw it live in action in one of these AWOL events, um, potentially ruining everyone's fun, especially since we don't have them on the cast. That's the only way to stop Runefolk. But we're waiting
No,
for
it's
some game art
true.
to produce.
We tried earlier in the day to commentator curse him 2 or 3 times in the No Unique Championship, and he nimbly dodged that every single time. So, surprised we weren't able to curse him then. I guess he might be immune, but we'll see whether we can whether, the power of blue is maybe stronger than the power of freeloader to commentator curse someone. So we'll find
Yeah.
out.
We'll have to see. We do see the fun initial Sandman play to just make things go asleep. In this scenario here, do you prefer, not that you're playing a lot of Sigmar these days, but do you prefer to sleep the Sandman itself, or do you prefer to sleep a token in a certain scenario?
I think it sort of depends on the cards that are in your hand in a lot of cases. I think that this line it's not bad. It's just never really where you want to be with a opening turn play, I would say, for the Sigmar deck. There's oftentimes a lot stronger things you can do. And typically, if you're keeping a Sandman to play on turn one as your opener into the game as Sigismar, something's gone sort of a little bit wrong in terms of where you wanted to be. And actually, yeah, you are seeing though exactly where there is a little bit of a punish for not having slept the token, in that the Waru does actually take an advance on the tumult, which is a incredibly non-standard thing to say for a matchup like this, especially at this point where every bureaucrat that you play just automatically gains a sleep and there's no other effect of the Waru and Mac hero ability. You typically just assume that Sigismar is going to be advancing like crazy, especially in the first couple turns.
Yeah, heads up play there by Runfolk as well, knowing that they weren't going to be able to get a sabotage off due to the legat, and deciding to advance on the hero side there, reveal the adventure card and see what they have to work with as far as stats with the legat that will be slept, and figure out what they're going to do, as we see a unique attorney come out from the Sigismar as its only play. And did Runefolk just pass that entire turn? They did.
Yeah, that's possible.
Okay.
uh,
That will allow for sabotage at the very least. Deciding opting to keep some cards in hand instead of playing them. So we'll have to see how that works out. I mean, Runefolk has done well thus far, so I have to assume they know what they're doing. Um,
Yeah, Rune definitely knows what they're doing, or at least I think more than anyone else who's been trying to put together Waru stuff at the current moment. Uh, there's a lot of interesting lines because the nature of the deck is so different in comparison to the way that most decks are trying to take advantages in a game. It's oftentimes the case that you just care about specific cards and specific effects, and there are certain turns where you just don't really care about what happens. It's just interesting to note that there wasn't really a setup for a subsequent turn there that Rune was able to find. It's probable then that there's no other copies of Monolith Legate that they were working with in their hand, for example. Other times, chances are we would have just seen that get slept as a potential way to sabotage yet another thing. But
yeah,
yeah,
or any bureaucrat that had an effect of not advancing at that point, right? So
yeah.
we'll see how that turns out for them, as we do see that Legat get sabotaged by the Orda spy. Um, and why not a unique Isatok and set up for that, right? Like, what else would you be playing in this scenario other than a unique Isatok, right?
Yeah, it's worth noting. This one's pretty sweet. From the front side, just for the stats 333, it does often look like just the rare, but notably does get eaten by Tiny Jail still because it lacks those four in any stats, making Tiny Jail absolutely absurd in this sort of scenario. Yet again, that card so good. I've been really impressed by it overall. But yeah, Runefolk stating in the chat, and that's the reason I can't beat Siggy. I've also at one point tried a Sigismar deck more recently with an Atlas configuration, which was actually really cool, had some combo elements to it. And then I remember the first time I ran into a Tiny Jail Sigismar player and getting my Atlas Tiny Jailed. Absolutely a feels bad man. But yeah, cool Isotalk though. Regardless, it does have a cool ability for drawing cards, but it does require you to control two or more landmarks for that to be the case. So I just typically imagine this is getting played out for five as a 3/3/3, sort of just the rare Isotalk.
Yeah, that pain of having to have 2 landmarks specifically, if only if it was a permanent,
Hmm.
condition, right? But, yeah, that Atlas interaction, just it makes no sense as far as the Tiny Jill is concerned, right? That's one of those scenarios that we need to have, like, some Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime rules that if anyone's aware of, that you can say, "Well, because my Atlas weighs over 500 pounds, I am able to burst out from the Tiny Jail, even though
Right?
it says it nowhere on the card." But not the case in this scenario. But we do see an Icebound Link that is one of those cards that you can combine quite well with an Outlist if you are using it in any type of deck, whether that be Gold Ring or Sigmar.
Yeah, Baba Yaga now coming out for Sigismar, and I think it's just such a good setup for them, especially if they have another 1 mana play in hand here to potentially threaten yet more Tiny Jail at this point. Rune also noting in the chat how good Rallying Call is against this Waru gameplay strategy, and I actually think that more than anything else, that card specifically, Rallying Call, might be the reason why I feel like Waru is currently sort of viewed as being a dead deck. At this point, you no longer have the ability to choose whether you want to sleep your bureaucrats. And so, if it ever would be advantageous for you to have it asleep and you do sleep it, it can just get eaten by the rallying call, which is insane. That interaction that we were mentioning a lot earlier. You no longer get the token, the one that Sigismar will get every single day at noon, totally for free. Virtually all removal from Sigismar's side, therefore, turns into at least one advance, if not more. Yeah, I get why this matchup looks bad.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you can kind of see the intention behind the developers of adding Rallying Call to the game and potentially utilizing it with Waru in some aspect and not so much against it. Maybe there was a little bit of counterplay that they intended overall, but it Waru just doesn't feel great right now. You can do well with it for sure, and you can figure out some stuff that Runfolk has obviously figured out at this point, but when you're going up against something like Sigismar, who is in fact the new leader of the bureaucrats, with the amount of characters that we see that are bureaucrats in their deck list, um, it doesn't feel good no matter which way you look at it, and is probably the reason why we see pretty much just only Sigismar being played at a high level on the competitive scene as far as Ortis heroes are concerned.
Yeah, I think honestly the biggest dynamic that Sigismar gets that does make it that peak competitive deck is the fact that no other deck turns removal directly into expedition progressions, and removal in Sigismar, because of the fact that they always have that free token, at least if they're not getting any more from other characters potentially that are able to generate more tokens. Removal turns into progressions directly in so many cases. And I really do think that's the critical reason why Sigismar is likely just the single best hero at the moment. There are definitely plenty of other really strong strategies that we're seeing. It's just some of them like Kojo does get that benefit of having the character every so often. So sometimes or half the time it gets a similar dynamic there. Sometimes the fact that it's a little bit larger means they can actually outstat things with it as well. But Sigismar just has such good ability to either push stats or convert removal into expedition progressions. It is insane.
And speak of the rallying call messing up sleeping abilities, sure enough, Sigismar does have it and is able to get just enough stats on that Baba Yaga to get the one advance on the tumult that they need, take the game, and leave Runefolk in the dust. GG, you tried your best, but Sigismar too strong. Don't nerf
Hey,
Sigismar. Don't.
yeah. At the end of the day, though, to some level, Waru is sort of atoning now for the crimes that he was committing, I guess, back in the very beginning of Altered, at least from set release back in September, the month or two that we had there of Waru domination. Yeah, I understand why, some crimes to be paid for, maybe still. But, considering that he is the bureaucrat king, I'm surprised that he's not the one creating the bureaucracy there still. But yeah, maybe we should tune into table two, see another really strong Sigismar player in someone that you interviewed and posted about earlier today. Even
Ooh, and I don't know if the game just ended or not.
not for me.
Okay, you're good. All right. Yeah, I don't see why Waru had to pay. It was only like a month or two. I feel like Waru did nothing wrong inherently. I think we had other people to blame in that situation, Robin Hood. But I can see it. Maybe we'll see some Waru changes, as is the plan according to Equinox here in future sets. But if not, we're looking at the good old traditional matchup that we've seen in season 1, in season 2, that's right. Sigmar versus Aonis, who can take it? Altered Aces mirror matchup, if you will. Trying to decide who is dominant. I hear that the loser is going to have to give away their unique card to the other, and they're gonna rip it up in front of their face. So let's see how that works out.
Yeah, and that will most probably be the Kokoba unique of Cladius, which is going to be a pretty sad loss until print on demand comes through for him. But yeah, we'll we'll see. Rallying Call coming out yet again, putting some stats and saying a little bit of an after you via putting that counter on the or that boost rather on the Orda Spy. But as it stands, if there is a spell from Aphanis, it's likely that the Mage Dancer will be able to go over the top still. But yeah, it does sort of force this Moth to a Flame at least to go onto the same side as the Mage Dancer.
Yeah. That ripping up a card thing that was always a big deal once upon a time really doesn't have the same effect in Altered as far as print on demand, I guess, does it? I guess it feels a little bit better if it's like a unique art or a promo of some sort, but not so much in general. As we see
For sure.
the one for one going on here, um, Sigismar on Cladius, being one away at this point from taking the game. A lot of ground to make up here for the Afonis player. Not looking ideal at this point, but I've seen crazier things happen. We could definitely see a comeback, but will take a lot for that to happen.
Yeah, it's worth noting that the upside for Aphanis here being that the cards that they have access to that are in reserve are at a discount and they are strong ones in general. Moth to a Flame potentially splitting stats across multiple expeditions if there's already a character in play like this Mage Dancer, which is very nice. And just, yeah, these cards being discounted while being in reserve is a nice benefit. However, Aphanis is down both in terms of cards, but also in terms of mana access this turn, which is really going to compound how strong this rallying call of an after you is in this sort of situation.
Yeah, we do see a rhyme frost come out here, which kind of indicates to me that this may be a withered tree bonus deck of some sort. But with the amount of things available here to the Sigismar player, it's looking less and less likely that we will see that comeback that we were hoping for. But nonetheless, I'm sure they'll still play it out here, see what we have left. And yes, the studious disciple initiating
It's the
everything we need.
Kokoba.
And and if you weren't aware of the unique that we were talking about before, if you wanna win just an expedition, why not just play this card? I was gonna look in the discard pile earlier to see if he had played it already, because this pretty much guarantees 1 expedition advance regardless of where you're at. But yeah, good card. Um,
Yeah, I for a second thought that the Aphanis was actually going to have a great line to be able to come back and potentially win the game there. And the Kokoba said, "Ha! Nice try. Try again next time when you find better uniques." And yeah, that one's pretty good. Puts out multiple characters, gives everything a boost, and that's both from hand and from reserve. So you can just do it again and again.
yeah, casual, too many stats. But, either way, we'll head on back here, see what some games that we have left playing here. Still quite a few that we can take a look at as far as what we have going here in round 4 of the Swiss. If you are unaware of where you are at currently and you maybe have amnesia, you are watching AWOL Season 2, Wednesday Weekly number 6, round 4 of the Swiss, as I mentioned. I am Blue, also known as Blue Oak TV on YouTube, hashtag ad. And I'm joined by the Keelan guy. Say hi once again.
Hello, once again. I'm at Kilon Guy on YouTube. And I definitely think I'm part of the cooler club of altered players, specifically because I've watched every YouTube video that Blue Oak TV has made. So check out their channel, and you can be as cool as all of us who have watched all of his videos.
Yeah, it's almost as cool as smoking for all you kids out there. So um, uh, do not prescribe to anything I say. AWOL is a separate entity than me as an individual. But either way, let's watch another game. I'm gonna go to table 24 just because.
God, it's so hard to commentate today, and you keep making me laugh. Oh no.
Let's switch over. Table 24 it
Ooh,
is.
we have a Colombia match. Two Colombian players battling it out. That's cool.
Always fun to see the different flags pop up and try to work on your world geography in general and that association. As an American, I don't learn about anything about the world, only what's within my borders. I can name all 50 states for you.
Ooh,
That's about it. Oh, and their capitals, but that's about as
uh,
limited as I can
you
get.
know, I'd request that you save that for after the stream, because otherwise we might miss some action here. It looks like a pretty cool one, actually. Tasia currently ahead on board. Aonis a little bit ahead in terms of card advantage, but not by much, thanks to this aloe vera that's remained around in play. Also sticking around is a sneezer shroom, which is pretty cool. So Tasia having a solid advantage in this turn, at least. Cards being played out this game so far, I'm seeing the discard at least from the Aonis. There was both a Banishing Gate, which has partially fallen out of favor a little bit, but also Spycraft, which is definitely a non traditional choice. And I'm wondering if they're choosing to make use of any of the cards from the new set yet, but we have not seen any yet from them. Meanwhile, the Tasia, having used a Lost in the Woods already this game at least, probably hit something pretty relevant, most likely a Katagiran Mage Dancer at some point.
Yeah, we'll have to see how things turn out here, but it's definitely looking favorable for the Tasia at this point, as we do see that second spycraft that you had mentioned already, as far as sabotage available to the Afonis player. And yeah, just seeing how things go overall. Speaking of the Banishing Gate that we've seen fall out of favor as a whole, and we've mentioned earlier on, Sticky Note Seals, also another card that has fallen out of favor for Sigmar players. Why
Hmm.
don't we see more heroes that utilize bigger permanents or bigger characters be more prevalent in that matter when there's less that can remove them at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in general, part of the dynamic is how strong just removal options have been against those sort of things, which was definitely holding down some strategies at different points in time. I would say in terms of things like Lyra Festival specifically, that's a really good litmus test for how good removal for permanence is at certain moments in time. And I think most people are realizing at this point when there is enough removal that just hits characters that have the specific conditions that you're looking to meet for that, it's largely preferable in comparison to having something that's specifically suited for going after the permanent itself. So yeah, it really depends. I would say the permanents that have been most popular in the game outside of specifically for Sigismar have been in general very low cost permanents. We saw some Baba's Isba earlier, for example, from Lindway. We've previously seen a lot of Haven Bravos Bastion, both in Axiom before the suspension, but also out of Bravos, and that is still absolutely very popular. In general, the higher cost a permanent, the more likely it is that you are conceding one or more expeditions in order to play it. Haven, sometimes you are conceding an expedition to play it, but oftentimes you're not even losing anything while playing it out, and the advantage you get from it is great. Meanwhile, building your deck around something like Brassbug Hive, for example, yes, it does come with a Brass Bug, but it's so likely that if you're spending 6 mana on it, that you're going to get double advanced on that turn, and that can just be so critical already. Sigismar being the one exception there because of the fact that they natively get that character at noon every day means that if they are able to play a permanent out, especially if it's either a little bit advance of curve, thanks to something like a Foundry Mechanic support ability, but also cards like Grand Endeavor, which are then harder to remove, means that if removal does go after the permanents, they do often result in getting an expedition progression thanks to that 1/1/1 Ortus Recruit token anyway. So they're sort of the exception, being able to leverage big permanents better than anyone else, while also leveraging little guys better than everyone else.
Yeah, indeed. Shout out to the Sigismar deck lists and getting a day two obelisk set up for everyone. Uh, what did they say? Obelisk? Jesus.
Obelisk.
I got Yu-Gi-Oh mind going on here.
see see
But
we've talked last week, or not last week, a couple weeks ago, about setting up a bingo card for these AWOL broadcasts, which I think is
yeah,
a great idea. And one of the things that I want to be on this bingo card is commentator refers to a altered TCG card by the name of something from a different card game. I think
yeah.
that's a really good one.
Yeah, monolith is what I was rather trying to mention. Day two monolith due to the foundry mechanic. But either way, don't act like you're not enjoying this, Simon. You just need to you need to. Yeah.
Hey, this is a great broadcast if I've ever heard one. Uh,
Anyway, we did watch that 2-0 for the Tasia player as we're actively talking about the actual game that we're watching. Um, Probably not the ideal scenario for the Aonis player, as the Tasia player gets to keep an anchored character out there on the hero side, and sure enough, gets to set up another one here on the companion. If you're the Aonis player, is there any particular thing you're trying to look for here to try to make this comeback?
yeah, definitely. I would say discount removal being at the main priority. At this point, it's going to have to be beauty sleep as well in order to actually be able to contest. But it's such a hard position, largely because the Tasia can leverage things like exactly what we're just seeing here: floral tent for 1 mana. Just in general, low cost things are so good in altered at the moment because of the ability to just pass back to the opponent and gain maximum information while committing as little as possible. Otherwise, I don't know what else there could be. A cheap character potentially paired with removal, paired with another spell to potentially shore up the companion side, with the 2/2/2 Sneezer Shroom being reasonably small there. But no, it looks like Beauty Sleep is the plan. And that, that does actually give some possibility, at least for Afanis to stabilize, but it's going to be hard.
Yeah. And it also gives the option for the Tasia to open up a little bit and set up even more if they like to, potentially just playing that aloe vera from reserve, but they'll instead just hit the one character that Afanis has out with the Lost in the Woods, an amazing card as far as Trial by Frost cards are concerned for the Muna faction in general. I know I've been hit by it once or twice, especially the permanent removal side of it. Don't have to do anything additional for it like you would have to with cards like Mana Reaping that you used previously for removal in Muna. But at the moment, we're still looking at an advance for the Muna folks, unless we see something crazy, but we don't because there's nothing in hand, and we'll see one more advance for Tasia to potentially take this game.
Yeah, and at this point as well, Tasia has more resources in terms of card access than the Afanis. They're going to have 3 cards between 1 in hand and then 2 in reserve. Or actually, no, never mind. Sorry, I missed the fact that that Sneezer Shroom was asleep, so they won't be able to play that out. So even in terms of card access, but Tasia will be starting with multiple cards in play already, each of them on their own threatening to win. Afanis is going to need to pull out some pretty sweet cards from the top of their deck in order to find a comeback here. It's probably going to have to start with an Off You Go and maybe some more goodies.
Yeah, and even if they can do something crazy on this day, they have a lot of ground to make up and to do realistically anything to take this game. But you never know. Things can happen. The underdog does win, just not that often. And I'm willing to take bets currently on the side while I'm not casting that says that Tasia is going to win this game. Odds are currently 50 to 1. This is not illegal. Anyway, let's see what we got going on here with Katagarin Mage Dancer for the Afanis.
Yeah, Mage Dancer, good in the sense that it is likely to be able to outstat that Dracana on its own, meaning that potentially removal could go after things on the companion side and and still be able to outstat on the hero side. But oh wow, what a cool one. We see a Eros unique coming down. It is in the correct expedition, the forest expedition, so they can now play this aloe vera onto the companion side for free actually, and they'll still have 1 mana left over to give it anchored as well. So that's super cool. And then interestingly as well, the Eros has a cool ability from reserve, which would let it remove something back to the top of its owner's deck if they control 2 or more boosted characters, which they're very likely to, thanks to that Tasia hero ability. So that's pretty cool. Now I'm wondering how how our Afanis player can actually survive here. Off You Go cannot hit Eros.
Yeah, and either way, they'd have to find a way to stop the companion side as well. So we unfortunately will not get to see the arrows used from reserve unless the Tasia decides to save it for the next game, which is not an option. So either way, we do see a fun game nonetheless and a fun unique coming out here from the Tasia player here in round four. Should be going into round five here fairly soon and getting into some undefeated folks to decide who's going to make it into the finals in round six as we see some Rhyme Frosts being played, trying to get enough boosts to get things up here on the hero side, despite not having anything to do on the companion.
Yeah, Rhymefrost, pretty cool card. Just not enough to prevent the expedition progressions on that companion side. In addition to outstatting on the hero side, would have taken a pretty crazy card in order to manage that. But yeah, Maple Soul takes a win there. Cool seeing an Eros unique. I don't think I've ever seen one of those in play, so excited about that, which is pretty sweet. And yeah, as you mentioned, I think we should be jumping into round 5 right now.
We are, in fact, in round five of the Altered Weekly Online League Season 2, Wednesday Weekly number 6. We'll go ahead and take a look at one of the two tables that has showing four of our undefeated players that we have left. We have either an Altered Aces matchup on table 2 or a non matchup of Altered Aces on table 1. Do you have a preference?
Well, to be fair, table one has one player from Altered Aces. That's Tempet. So, I mean, Altered Aces, they're killing it at this moment. At this point, nah, I'm happy either watching Cladius take down yet another team member of theirs, or watching the Afanis go ham.
Yeah, I think we've watched at least one player on each of the tables, so it really doesn't matter at this point. So let's go ahead and take a look at table one, just based off of a coin flip I did in my head, and see what we have going here as we refresh and wait on the game art. I want to thank everyone that has joined us thus far for the stream, been putting up with a little bit of craziness at the beginning, starting late, but also during the entire stream.
Exactly.
We are loaded in here, and we will see the fun Aonis versus Sigismar matchup, as is tradition here in the top tables, and we'll see who can take this one.
Yeah, should be a pretty good one. I do think in general, Sigismar is favored in this matchup at the moment with most lists that they play. Interested to see what sort of configuration the Sigismar will be on, whether it's going to be Monolith, whether it's going to be Endeavor, and what sort of uniques they're going to be working with. Chances are they're not as crazy as Cladius's Kakoba, but they could be pretty insane in their own ways.
Yeah, indeed. And Marco in the chat, there are 6 rounds in total for the Wednesday weekly. We will be looking at the potential of a new round being added for the Monday weekly, something for everyone to look forward to as that will get expanded. But speaking of uniques, we do see one played right away, and it is one that we have seen already that allows the Afanos just to draw a card.
Yeah, nicely that it does have stats, meaning that if it does get a boost from a single spell being played at this point, it would threaten to go over this 1/1/1 Ordis recruit. But Sigismar definitely still having some options there, potentially playing another character on top of it would give them a progression instead. But yeah, I think it's a nice card advantage opener from Afanas, being able to magical training on top of the Immune Caregiver, which also drew a card, and threatening to draw more cards the next turn. I like card advantage in general. I think it's one of the reasons to play Afanas, and this is definitely one of the super sweet openers that gets some access to it.
And unfortunately for them, they do see one of those one cost cards that you are mentioning that can help you go over the top. And it sure enough is the rallying call that we have talked about several times during this cast. It's just Toxin blowing on a horn, telling everyone to get ready, pretty much. But
Yep.
it's a popular card in Sigismar. If you're not running it, you should.
Hmm.
Go ahead and replace something else that you have for that rallying call. It helps in several scenarios, including just giving a boost.
You know, awkwardly, I would actually say though that the fact that it was played out on turn one might actually be a good thing for our Faunus player, despite that converting into a progression and double advance for Sigismar. You are just so dead to this card in the late game if Sigismar still has access to cards that I think just hoping that they see fewer copies of it over the course of the game might actually help a little bit. I think this card gets sort of better for Sigismar as the game goes on in many circumstances. as long as again they don't run out of cards entirely. Oh, and we do see a card that we did talk about a little bit earlier with this Jack Frost that not all Sigmar players are playing, but this one seems to be doing so, and they do hit this Muna Caregiver unique, which is nice to prevent some of the potential card draw on this turn at least. But yeah, we'll see what other characters, if any, are Aonis is still working with in hand.
And it's also one of those things that it opens up for another 2 cost play here for the Sigismar player, including the Legat if they so choose. So it's definitely a benefit opposed to a Ortis Spy, where typically you do want to play it on a first turn play to knock out something in reserve, but you always have to pay 3 mana for it, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to play something else up in as a follow up. But having a 2/2 cost play is also pretty nice in Sigismar, as we see that unique red that we talked about a lot. Um, that all it needs is 2 boosts, and pretty soon you're returning a bunch of cards from your reserve to your hand.
Oh, and it's paired with the helping hand earlier. When this unique was played the last time, I was mentioning how it goes off with helping hand specifically in a pretty crazy way. I'm assuming they're just going to return that helping hand here to start enabling that further. And yes, they do choose to do so. So as it stands, this red is going to demand removal pretty much immediately as soon as it's played. Notably, they also played that with correct turn order to be able to play out that red before it can get either exhausted or sabotaged, which is a really good line. So well done for doing that correctly, at least, assuming they had the option previously. Definitely like that.
Yeah, it's always one of those things, especially for you folks out there that are not as experienced within the Alter TCG. It does matter how you play things as far as who has the priority for first players in the following day to help you out and potentially not get sabotaged or some form of removal in that capacity. As we do see a sabotage hit that Jack Frost, the fauna has saying that they do not want to see things exhausted anymore, so they don't even have to worry about playing that red right away.
Yeah, I think this is a really heads up play from the Afanis as well. Essentially, it's very clear to the Sigismar that what they were going to need immediately this turn was going to be removal for this red. And doing that was essentially an attempt of trying to catch the Sigismar on a situation where they maybe have that removal but aren't able to use anything. But as it stands, yeah, just Baba Yaga gets played out from Sigismar. That ended up being a pretty good play, but it didn't appear they had the 2 mana removal after all for this red. So red is just going to continue to go off here for the time being, which is yeah, really nice.
Yeah, and we will see that one rallying call stat being put on the token. Initially, I thought just to block and prevent a 2-0, but they did have that Foundry mechanic in hand to at least get one advance and try to do their best to stay ahead of this Aphanis as it starts gaining a little bit momentum utilizing that unique of the red.
hmm And there, interesting decision to be made there from the Afanis as well was whether they wanted to anchor their Tooth Fairy with that Munich Caregiver unique that was in reserve there, and they ended up opting not to. And I really like that as well, given on how few cards the Afanis is running at this point, giving them just a little bit more ability to dig through their deck. Rather than just keeping the one character around, when there's still a couple expedition progressions that the Sigismar can make before the Afanas is dead to them. I like it, especially if they were really concerned about finding certain cards still for the matchup. So yeah, pretty cool. I like seeing all these decisions that can be made, and notably in this case, the Afanis decided that it was worth just discarding a Tooth Fairy away rather than keeping something on the board and getting rid of this unique. So they're valuing it very highly. But wow, Grand Endeavor coming out, and that is brutal.
Yeah. Speaking of the Moon Caregiver, if you aren't aware, it does draw from anywhere. So that's what Keelan Guy was talking about in referring to things. And honestly, the Tooth Fairy for the common does never really feel too good to be played from reserve. So not entirely surprising there. But yeah, one question I was actually about to ask you as we were going through
hmm
it is if you are the Sigismar here and if you have a Grand Endeavor, especially being ahead, you're definitely playing it right away here, right? Just to get things
Oh
going.
yeah, oh yeah. It in most situations simply wins the game on the spot when they play this into the matchup. Afanis is pretty terrible into this card specifically. Monolith, they care about a lot less. Many Sigmars opting to prefer running the Monolith because oftentimes the matchup is good enough for them anyway that they don't need to play the Endeavor over it. And Grand Endeavor is also costing a rare slot. But yeah, the reason, however, that this Aphanis isn't simply, conceding, other than that, they could theoretically otherwise get a double advance into double advance, small step, giant leap, something like that, is also that they can still potentially dig a little bit through their deck for another red unique that they do have access to, which does have the effect of being able to discard a permanent that is in play. So if they're able to find that quickly enough here, they might actually be able to fight through it.
Yeah, and it was a fun little line that they played there too in order to anchor that mage dancer with the use
Hmm.
of the unique that we mentioned earlier, instead of replaying that red and potentially just cycling the helping hand again. They'll still have that option if they pull out another helping hand or if they have something else that they want to work with. But in the meantime, they do get the double advance that they do need, able to remove that foundry mechanic from the reserve with a sabotage and limit the resources that the Sigmar has a little bit. But
Hmm.
we will go into an action, and funny enough, the Sigmar decided not to mana on this day.
Interesting. I guess that means there are a ton of 1 and 2 cost plays here in Sigmar's hand. Potentially something like Rallying Call would still be really good in this sort of situation. But otherwise, just, Ordis Troopers, always good options. Especially though, if there's teamwork training, I think those are likely to be most critical at this spot. Being able to find a single progression at this point will be enough to lock up the game as long as that Grand Endeavor does stick around. And in order for it to not stick around, it needs to be specifically a unique that I mentioned earlier. It's a red, but it's not the one that we currently see.
Yeah, and we're definitely looking at a situation for the Afanis here where they actually do need to prevent any advance whatsoever from the Sigismar player to avoid a delayed loss in the following day through an at noon effect of the Grand Endeavor. We'll see if they're able to do that and potentially get a 2-0 for themselves and pull in the area of a small step victory before they can lose to a Grand Endeavor victory. But in the meantime, still 2 mana left for the Sigismar, and like you
Oh
mentioned,
man,
I have to imagine we have some low cost stuff showing up.
yeah, this one isn't over though, actually. I was, thinking for a second that a removal spell from the Sigismar might be enough to take it, but there's actually a big threat here that a another helping hand, for example, would be able to lock up the game for Afanis if they still found a copy of Small Step Giant Leap, but no removal comes through either, and suddenly we're in a position where Afanis could just have a small step win out of nowhere, it seems.
Yeah, it's gonna be entirely based off of what they're drawing here. I know we saw earlier on, uh, Afanis taking a victory based off of a magical training into a small step giant leap play on a final day. They do have at least 3 cards in hand that we are not aware of, one of them being that magical training, and they just drew 2 more, so they definitely have an opportunity to do so, but we will see the Sigismar go even with them on the Tumult due to the Grand Endeavor at noon. It'll just be dependent on who can take it here in this final day.
Yeah, definitely very high chances of Afanis having found a small step by now. However, they do only play two. There are some lists that play three, some that play two. So definitely still up in the air as to whether or not they found it, whether multiple one or more have found their way into mana thus far over the course of the game. Oftentimes, a small step in your opener does just have to go directly into mana. You don't get much option about that. So yeah, well, definitely it's a possible win here off of drawing cards, but enough decision making is going on here from Aphanis that we can sort of assume that they do not have it yet.
Yep, and we do not see the Mage Dancer come out from reserve either, instead opting for that Spindle Harvester rare coming from the hand. A lot of low cost stuff, and I think at this point it's going to turn if the Sigismar has enough low cost to slow play this Aphanis, which I don't think they have with all the low cost things
No.
that they do have. But they will get an advantage from that Overseer because it is behind on the expedition. I don't know if they'll have enough though to keep up with the Aphanis.
Yeah, somehow though, just even without having found small step or anything, it doesn't look like the Afanis is going to need it at this point. This red that was able to get looped with the correct turn order for so long there with the helping hand, not get sabotaged, not get exhausted, really just giving so much value over the course of this game that they were able to find a comeback here. It's just sort of ridiculous stats that it has as it stands, and yeah, they should be able to advance with pretty much anything here on the hero side. So that'll do it.
Yeah, GG to both players was a close one. Sigismar put the Afanis player on the clock with that Grand Endeavor play, and they were able to respond accordingly and get it two double advances directly afterwards in order to take this game and put themselves undefeated going into the final round of round six. And we'll have to see who else came out on the other table to face them at this point.
Can't help but hope for the Sophonis player that they will win their final round because they were the champion earlier today in the No Unique Championship. So it would be pretty cool to go back to back from, winning a unique list to a tournament with uniques as well. That would be really sweet.
And we'll go ahead and jump straight into the other undefeated table here on table two to
Yep.
see how this one ends. And it is the good old fashioned Sigismar mirror matchup. It looks like Clay was able to take a lead at some point, or maybe they were able to get a lead through the Grand Endeavor play from their opponent. And now we're just going to see if they can maintain the current lead before the top Sigismar is able to get the victory either due to Grand Endeavor or just characters.
Yeah, top Sigismar's game plan at this point is stall. Bottom Sigismar's game plan is advance. So that's pretty much it at the end of the day. Um, it's worth noting that Clay does have more cards, and that is definitely a good leg up that they do have. Main worry is that this turn specifically, they're down to just 2 mana. That needs to be a good way of spending 2 mana. Otherwise, I'm very worried for their position. Definitely possible still that the top Sigismar could otherwise find one, if not two advances, and Grand Endeavor would add a third onto the top of that, which would lock up the game if they're able to find a double advance. So definitely pressure is on for Clay to find a way to either deal with this Grand Endeavor or more accurately, just deal with the board well enough for such little mana they have.
Yeah, speaking of little mana, usually as a Sigismar player, you're usually feeling pretty good with having 2 mana left to play, but when you're playing another Sigismar that also has 2 mana and at least 1 card in hand, maybe not feeling as good.
Hmm.
So we'll have to see how Clay is going to sort things out here. The fact that we do see multiple cards in hand means we probably has multiple plays here potentially. It just depends on how they want to do it. And then we'll just have to see how the other Sigma responds, if they respond at all.
Yeah, totally. I really wonder what the decision is here for our top Sigismar. Chances are they're wondering if like somehow it becomes worth it to fire removal off on this Orda spy, and then potentially what sides to play on otherwise. But wow, Clay's play comes out so quickly with the Foundry mechanic on the companion side. It was very clear that they knew what they were going to be doing this turn.
Yeah, and we will, like the chat is saying, have a Altered Aces versus Altered Aces matchup here in the finals, regardless of who wins this game. It just matters who will take it as far as the Sigismar player. And we will be watching another Sigismar versus Afanis matchup and in the finals of round six. But with that single advance, we will be looking at a adjacent versus adjacent setup here on the tumult, meeting up in the middle. No one's behind. Everyone's equal. An overseer won't matter. I don't know if either of these Sigismars are running overseers, but it won't. Nothing else other than a grand endeavor in play, which technically means there is somewhat of an advantage there for the top Sigismar, but we also see more cards in hand for the bottom Sigismar in clay to potentially work with. So either way, it's going to be a fun final day here in round five.
Yeah, I agree. I can't help but feel like it's very likely that this game will end up going to tiebreaker. Love the choice from Clay to get rid of the 1 cost Ordis Trooper there instead of the 2 cost Monolith Legate. Just the sheer stats to cost ratio of that one mana play in Ordis Trooper rare is absolutely insane. So understand why they're choosing to get rid of that one. When functionally the Monolith Legate has the same stats breakdown for double the mana cost. And in a turn where it's very threatening that both players might end up spending all of their mana, definitely makes sense playing that out there. But it's also interesting to note that this Ordis Trooper from the top Sigismar is actually super threatening, given that the Foundry mechanic does not have the same stats as it. And wow, Isatok coming down here in this turn, that's an incredible one. And I don't know what removal that Clay might be working with that could actually deal with this Isatok at this point.
We do have 4 mana left, and we know with 4 mana left, there's always an opportunity, especially in the unique variety. I haven't looked in his discard pile, but you never know. But it is not that unique that I was thinking of. We do have an
Hmm.
eternity coming out. Question is, can they make up the stats here with only 2 mana left, as you were mentioning? And we'll have to see what it is. A rallying call will come out, but that won't be enough, will it?
No, unfortunately for them, they are in a situation where the expeditions are just not lining up in a way where it'll do much good. And yeah, that one stat point from the Ordis Trooper just takes it this turn. Even if it was the same card, if it was both Foundry mechanics on each side, the Grand Endeavor would have taken it the next. I
Yeah.
think the only card that could have potentially gotten through that Isatok this turn, other than potentially that Kakoba unique, would be Sandman. I think he's playing it still, maybe as a one of.
Yeah, I believe he's still running Sandman, and that's another thing that I was going to mention as well. Is I believe Clay is one of the few Sigmars that is actually still running 3 spies that we saw being played at the beginning there.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Preferring that over the Jack Frost utility that we had also mentioned before. But yeah, good game there from both players, both from Altered Aces. So we will see an Altered Aces championship here shortly. We'll see what we have left here in round 5 of the Swiss of the AWOL Season 2 Wednesday Weekly number 6. Once again, wants to thank everyone that has joined us thus far. And we will get into the final round here shortly as we have only a few games left. Um, we can just pick one that we have available. We have watched at least I'm pretty sure we've watched a few of these that are still running, at least some of the players.
Hmm.
Um,
Table
may
25, I don't think we've seen. Psychos against Psycho.
okay, we have a Psycho matchup going on
Yeah,
there.
it's a pretty funny coincidence there. They're paired here.
Yeah,
Oh, and it's over. Never mind.
JK, we're not going to that.
I
Uh,
tried.
yeah, we did our best, but in the meantime, we can take a look to see the other ones. I'm just gonna click table 14 before that one ends and give everyone something else to watch. It is a Tasia versus the Lindway hero. I don't believe we watched Symbiosis's Lindway here today, but we do have a Kickstarter Anubis in the discard pile as far as a unique, and we are seeing the use of the Mobile Armory rare out of faction.
Yep, that's a good one. These new builds of Lindway definitely making good use of it, along with Chrysalis. Turns out both modes are really relevant, just making a token, but also sometimes preventing the defender thing from mattering at all. And yeah,
Mhm.
boom here going to remove something critical. I'm wondering whether that will be the Hydrocana, and it is, paying the additional tough two for it. But yeah, I mean, that's well worth it when you're otherwise going to be able to overstat on the remaining character on that hero side. I mean, I'm assuming they're progressing, not only stalling on that hero side. Could be wrong, but yeah, nice that they're able to take out the Hydrocana and not have it stick around for further turns. And yes, indeed, Alchemist does progress over the Sneezer's Room.
Yep, they will get that double advance, keeping themselves alive in this game and at least putting themselves in position to double advance again on the following day and potentially take the game. So we'll see how that has to turn out. We do see that unique Kitsune being played. I think is one of the ones that we had seen earlier as far as uniques are concerned. It is when I go to the reserve from the expedition zone, each player draws a card. And at dusk, up to one target character with hand cost 3 or less, other than me, gains anchored. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can't help but feel like Lindway's position here, though, is just so good, given the very few cards that Tasia is still working with at this point, and the fact that Lindway has found themselves with a mana advantage and this Baba's Isba still in play. Mana advantage sort of negated because of this bountiful meta that's in play for the Tasia, but they're still just going to likely have to make all of their decisions before the Lindway truly commits one way or another still. And yeah, I think it's very likely that Lindway is going to be able to find a double advance this turn, or at least be able to stall. And stalling, again, likely good enough because small step, giant leap. We've said it before, we'll say it again. That card makes things really good when you can make things go even.
Yeah, and why not throw another house out there just to draw a card and see what your opponent has? They will get that floral tint out there and give them a few more resources in that tiny gin. But then we get another response of another one cost. One of those things with this Tasia, since we know they are running some variant of ramp, is that they could also, in some ways, not be able to slow play and have lower cost cards if they're running or if they haven't managed the other Hydracenas. But they were able to hit at least the tiny gen, only one card left in hand, and we will likely see an after you here shortly. And sure enough, we do, coming from the Lindaway. So now it's all up to the Tasia's last card. Will they have enough? Will they not? We're about to find out.
Yeah, I'm loving the slow play here largely because it plays around Beauty Sleep super well. In this case, Mana Reaping, it's sort of just like front half of Beauty Sleep in this sort of instance. Yeah, it just takes out a Baba's Isba, but that's not really going to do much of anything. And oh
Oof.
wow, the Blizzard just wrecks the Tasia here. I don't think I've ever seen this card looking as dominant as it did in that specific spot. That's crazy.
That's that tells you something, kids. Put Blizzard into your deck list if you want to play Ysmir. Just I'm telling you, do it no matter which hero you're playing. Just play Blizzard regardless. Either way, that will get that double advance that we mentioned earlier that the Lindley player was looking for, coming back from sure defeat to take the game, and that should take us pretty close to the end of this round. But we'll take
Yeah,
a look.
we are into our final round.
Final round, and as everyone in the chat has mentioned, this will in fact be an Altered Aces versus Altered Aces matchup. Aonis v Sigmar. If you want to learn more about Altered Aces and the founder, feel free to watch a video on my YouTube channel that is occasionally popping up below me, Blue Oak TV. Little shameless promo, real quick, before we get into this final game. Anything that you're going to be looking for from either of these players in this final round?
Yeah, it's funny though. I was just noticing that there's not only these two undefeated players from Altered Aces, but there's also then two at five at a potential 5-1 finish. Also contesting that, there's two players from Team After You who are also at that potential 5-1 spot. So, other teams also doing pretty well. It's just Altered Aces definitely showing up today in the top tables for sure. It's kind of shocking, both here in these final rounds of AWOL, but also earlier in the No Unique Championship. So that's crazy. Yeah, I'm interested to see how aggressive the Sigismar's start is going to be in this specific game. Excited to see whether or not the Aonis is going to be able to stall a little bit, potentially prevent something from like a Grand Endeavor from making much headway, or otherwise, if a Grand Endeavor does come out, I'm excited to see whether or not we will see that mysterious third unique red that I've been talking about from Tempets that we haven't seen in play yet, but I keep mentioning with this ability to discard permanents, and that's the one right there.
Sure enough, we see it come out a little bit earlier than we may have expected, but it does the job as far as getting in advance, and especially after the Sigismar traditional Baba Yaga turn one play. Why not play it? You're going to get a draw, and your chances are you're going to take an expedition. But either way, not horrible for either player between the Sigismar and the Afanis, and at this point, it just becomes who can take advantage of these early resources.
Totally. This is one of these situations where it's a little bit of a slower start from Sigismar, but I can't help but feel like their chances of finding double advances over the next couple turns are very high. And it is, really risky from, at least for the Afanis, having their red unique out so early, when it is potentially so critical, given one of the ways that potential draws from the Sigismar deck can work. If the Sigismar is, for example, able to find a couple progressions here into a turn where there are two expeditions or more ahead and then play a Grand Endeavor, and they no longer have access to this red unique because of something like a sabotage or exhaust effect, it's going to be really hard for Afanis to find a comeback. We've seen them do it before, but whether they can do it again, that might not be two times that they're able to manage it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those situations where you kinda feel like all the pieces have to fall in the right spots in order for that to happen, especially going up against a top tier Sigismar deck of any sort. So we'll have to see how that plays out for them in general as they do a little bit of slow playing of throwing out the Studious Disciple into the Sigismar that will likely be able to follow up with some decent plays between some two costs that they have in their deck list, whether that is the Baba Yaga from reserve or something in hand. And sure enough, we do see one of those things that can mess up that red early on, and it is the Ortis Spy.
That is very good for the Sigismar, especially because they're ahead in terms of card advantage. But it is worth noting, at least though, that that does give multiple opportunities for the Ephanis to potentially find even a double advance this turn. But no, it's just looking to be the single advance. Baba Yaga, very good card here. There's going to be two relevant cards in reserve for the Ephanis. Baba Yaga being good as it will be discount cost.
Ooh,
But oh man, that actually does prevent the advance. It doesn't allow them to advance themselves, but does at least prevent the Ephanis from getting ahead. But yeah, Baba Yaga and Studious Disciple in reserve, not a bad place to be. The fact that they do get a redraw off of that Baba Yaga just from hand ability, that's super important working with low card counts. Yeah, just having access to things is very important. But honestly, at this point, Afanis's position in the game is pretty good, actually. Rallying Call being played out already and being part of the known information is a lot better for the Afanis than it not being known information. And the fact that Sigismar had to cash in a little bit in terms of card advantage in order to make that play happen. Otherwise, the Orda Spy would have simply gone to reserve instead, but they did have to discard it away then at the end of the turn in order to keep that rallying call around. So, yeah, everything, all that's said and done, not too bad for Afanis at this point either.
yeah, that's what I was about to ask you actually from the state of the Afanis, if you're actually feeling pretty good about even though you want to advance, not advancing in that scenario after seeing the rallying call being played and going even
Mhm.
on card advantage from it being played, and seeing if at the end of the day that might be a mistake for the Sigismar player in the sense of instead of going one for one, giving up a card and potentially giving up a little bit of a clue of what you have in hand as far as the rallying call is concerned. I guess we'll have to find out. But we do see a unique Muna caregiver that we
Mhm.
have seen before that will help with that card advantage situation that we've been talking about.
My main read of this game so far as the Afanis player is that with all of the information that we know, we likely think that the Sigismar wouldn't have made that play unless they had specifically Grand Endeavor in their hand, because that would be the main reason that they're so concerned about Nafana's progression at that point. So I think right now the Afanis is trying to take as conservative of lines as possible to try to prevent Grand Endeavor from going crazy with a more than one expedition lead, at least, which does make it a lot harder to play out as such. But yeah, here things looking pretty good this turn for Sigismar. Again, potentially that ability to turn removal into expedition progressions that Sigismar has, like what I was mentioning earlier. And but luckily for Afanis, they are able to stall this turn. They won't advance on that hero side, but the off you go on the Baba Yaga there at least means that no one's going anywhere. So all that's said and done, again, another decent turn for Afanis, I'd say.
Yeah, and it kind of lends to what you had mentioned before as far as the potential of the Sigismar having the Grand Endeavor in hand. It definitely could have played that Studious Disciple and just blocked on the hero side, opposed to using it for its support ability
Mm-hmm.
and not showing that off you go from in their hand. But by delaying that turn entirely it makes that Grand Endeavor play this day a lot less likely for the Sigmar, but they're
Nope,
still gonna
there it
do it
is.
anyway.
It
Uh,
you have to. If it's part of your deck, it's really good into the matchup, you know it, and you've gotten rid of the one piece that actually deals with it on its own, and this essentially says that Afanis needs to advance, like, twice as much as the Sigismar does for the rest of the game. Um, as Sigismar, you're very likely to, if not just outstat and do crazy things in general, you're likely to find a situation at least where you're able to convert a spell like this Tiny Jail into finding some progression here or there. And so even if you're cheesing expedition wins at some point that feel very not guaranteed, you're likely just to be able to find enough of them that you're still able to win with the Grand Endeavor. So I like this line. It was pretty telegraphed from a couple turns ago, I would say, from nearly the beginning of the game, but it's a good one. And they are ahead on board, which means that it's unlikely that Afanis is going to get too much of a crazy leg up from it. It's likely just to go even this next turn. I think the real question will be whether or not there is a two, like a back-to-back double advance rather than just the one here.
Yeah. We'll just have to see how that turns out. In general, we do see that Moon Caregiver reserve effect come into play in pulling back that off you go and instead putting the helping hand down. And this will allow the Moon Caregiver to come back here potentially, as well as getting that double advance that you mentioned. But overall, I think, as you mentioned earlier, since it was fairly telegraphed, the Afanis did the best they could knowing that we would likely see that grand endeavor. And at this point, it's just going to come down to what they can draw and what they can play in order to have to try to take this game with having that clock on them, especially with that red that they played early on in day one not being available to them.
I think it was interesting here seeing the helping hand go onto this Munich caregiver rather than putting the additional boost onto the category in Mage Dancer. Mage Dancer at four boosts would, or I'm sorry, at three boosts for a total of 444 in stats would have let them draw a card there, versus them putting it onto the Munich caregiver means that they're going to be able to keep their unique around a little longer, potentially leverage that when played from reserve ability that lets them put a spell into from their hand into reserve and return something else. But also just the ability for the when played from anywhere draw a card thing to happen, or yet again, alternatively, potentially anchor a character. But it's interesting seeing them prefer that over the card draw on the previous turn, but, I can see it at this point. Definitely good arguments either way, and it's probably very much dependent on the rest of the cards in Afanis's hand. But I think this Orda Spy here from Sigismar is so critical in this sort of spot. The main threat to you is double advances from Afanis, and the things that make double advances very hard to stop is when they start with a character that costs a single mana, as does Katagir Mage Dancer for the one mana when played from reserve. That is so important because overall, as Sigismar, typically you're trading mana with a mana advantage in terms of spending removal onto characters, and that's the one main exception there with a Mage Dancer. When played from reserve, it will cost less than all of your removal, making it a very big threat, and it also grows very, very large and can outstat virtually anything else. So, like that choice to just get rid of that right off the bat, it's going to make things a lot harder for Afanis.
Yeah, definitely. And as we see that off you go, it's probably what I was thinking earlier as it refers to that Moonic caregiver and the idea of potentially being able to cycle that off you go a little bit to remove the possibility of the Sigismar player to advance outside of the Grand Endeavor,
Hmm.
especially since they were lower on resources in hand than the Aphanis as a whole. Maybe counting on the idea that they may not be able to run into some other characters, since I feel like a lot of Sigismar players have increased the amount of spells slash permanents that they've included in their deck lists nowadays in season
Hmm.
2. So obviously not the ideal scenario that you mentioned getting sabotaged with that Katagir and Mage Dancer, because looking at least fairly decent with that having that available going into this day. But we'll have to work around it here and currently behind on both expeditions to try to prevent this Sigismar from advancing twice, but hopefully trying to stop them from advancing at all. Um,
Yeah. Afanis here over the next two turns, in order to really threaten to win the game themselves with their ideal game plan, needs a combination of a double advance and a single advance. while they will only be able to allow, I believe, a single, just a single advance, even in order for that line to actually work out the way they want it to. Um, as it stands, though, this turn, unless the last card is something like a Beauty Sleep, they're not going to be able to manage a double advance themselves. It is likely that they will be able to stall one of the expeditions with virtually any spell. For example, like a magical training would be sort of ideal for that. If they, assuming they're going to put a boost on the hero side at some point here to stall that side, and then a second boost from any other spell being played could end up going on the Moth to overstat in the companion. But overall, a one for one trade would very much favor the Sigismar, thanks to yet again that Gren Endeavor hanging out in play. Um, but I think there should be the options I would imagine to be able to stall this turn on the hero side as well. But we'll see. It could be that they missed on the one cost.
Yeah, definitely. It's always a possibility. And want to thank everyone real quick as we have a pause in the gameplay for joining us thus far in this weekly Wednesday number 6 for Altered Weekly Online League, also known as AWOL. We are watching the final, and sure enough, we do see that beauty sleep that my co-caster has mentioned, and this will allow that double advance that the Aonis needed oh so dearly to keep this game alive. They will have to deal with that Baba Yaga on the following day, but one problem at a time.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this also gives them the chance, at least, to contest potentially on just one side. As long as they're able to stop the Sigismar from progressing on one of the two sides and they progress themselves, they are threatening a small step giant leap win before the Sigismar would win off of a Gren Endeavor. So, actually, pretty intense game we have going on here. I think the main thing that's really worrying, though, from the Afanis's perspective, is that tiny jail just hanging out in reserve. I think the card that I want to see the most at this spot is specifically Tooth Fairy.
Yeah, it definitely could be a situation for the Afanis that would help them out tremendously. That tiny jail has been sitting around for quite some time as we see the Grand Endeavor at noon being set up here for the Sigismar. But instead, we'll see a four-cost Flamel come out to pick up that beauty sleep that'll also help them out here potentially um, during this day, especially since the Flamel has some pretty decent stats for the terrain that they're currently on.
Yeah, Flamel, one of the things that was always pretty good about this card was its ability to dodge teamwork training, for example, in many situations because of it costing 4, requiring there to be 4 characters in play for a Sigismar before a teamwork training could go after it. In this case, also nimbly dodges Tiny Jail, so that's actually really efficient in that sort of spot. I think a big worry, though, is potentially the risk of an Isatok coming down
Ooh.
for the Sigismar player at this point,
Right.
and which in that one would be particularly good, and there wouldn't be much that Afanis can do to deal with that at this point.
Yeah, and we do in fact know that it exists after watching our semifinals matchup. Not a
Yep.
character that you see very often in this matchup, but due to the amount of characters out on the field, we do see that teamwork training come into play. We'll have to see if we have anything else working out here. We do see the cost reduction come out here, which will allow not only the helping hand to be played, but a beauty sleep if it is needed.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good line here for Afanis. It's going to come down likely to what this last card is for Sigismar at this point. But I feel like you have to just fire it off the beauty sleep and make him have another teamwork training.
Yep, and we'll see what they decide to do here. Gonna get some more boosts on that moth, which of course will not be able to be hit by that tiny jail that is waiting in the reserve. And we will see the rallying call, the arch enemy of beauty sleep and Afanis at this moment.
It
Imagine,
hurts so much.
imagine a one cost card doing that to you. And
Wow.
not just that, but hitting it twice to get the double advance and traditionally the triple advance at noon. Wow. What a game to way to end the game.
Oh, that was so close too. And there were no two cost characters in the deck that do it. It was specifically that or teamwork training at that point either. Ah, that is so brutal. Rallying call. I mean, I don't know if there's a better contender for card of the day, but we saw it do like everything.
Yeah, everyone always talks big game about Tiny Jail, but all it did was sit in the reserve the entire time, and Rallying Call doing the actual work for Sigmar these days. And why is it doing work for Sigmar as well? I mean, I thought that was Toxin on the card. You give support to certain heroes, and then Sigmar just co-ops it. It's crazy. Either
It
way.
totally agreed there.
That was the final of the round 6 matchup here on the Altered Weekly Online League Season 2, Wednesday Weekly number 6. We'll probably have some more games to take a look at, but that with that victory there, we will see a Sigismar victory for the Altered Aces on Citra.
Yeah.
Um, and we do still have table 2 with Clay and Nitrocete, still being played,
Mhm,
so we can take
mhm.
a look at that.
Yeah, huge congrats there to Citro. That was solid Sigismar gameplay overall, taking down some other incredible players over the course of the tournament. So, good job to you. And let's see if Altered Aces can put another Sigismar into the top ranks of the tournament again now. But it looks like they're fighting Fen in a situation where Fen has a ton of card advantage.
Yeah, sorry, Runfolk, I had already jumped into a game before I saw your plea to watch you on Waru. I'm sure you're doing great things. Stall out the game a little bit, you're pretty good at that, and then we'll
It's
get to you, I
true.
promise. Um, we will see the clutch Ebenezer Scrooge being played and a unique AWOL come out here that lets you discard a card from reserve. If you do, each character controlled by target player gains fleeting. All right. So even with a
Oh my.
double advance here, that will leave a minimal amount of resources for the Sigismar player coming up on the following day.
You have to assume at this point as well that the Fen, with that number of cards, likely has something they can play for 2 mana that'll let them advance on that hero side instead of just
Twinkle twinkle.
yeah, exactly, or Twinkle Twinkle for example. But yeah, Off You
Yep.
Go also does it. All right, cool. I was worried for a second that they'd play out their cool 5/5/5, get rid of all these resources, but then potentially still let Sigismar double advance and have a good life in the game still. But oof.
Yeah, big play there by the Finn player. It will allow for a 1-for-1 and honestly putting them in a good position here in the following day to take the game. We'll have to see how the Sigismar player can respond. They do have that monolith out to be able to boost up their token as soon as it comes out. And I have to imagine we may not even see a mana show up here depending on what they have in hand.
Yeah, the reason why I think, unfortunately for Clay, that he is just dead in the water in this spot here is because he's working with 6 mana. The Fen, so much card advantage, so much more mana than the Sigismar at this point. I can't imagine that there's a way that they will fumble it from here.
And we do see them monoing anyway, so only 2 cards available at this point for them. And the only good news being that they are the second player, but that also means that they won't get the advantage of that monolith or Bastion at this point. But we do see a unique cadets come out.
And
It's
it
one of those.
draws a card.
Yeah.
It's a draw a card token spammer. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yep, super good.
Too bad they couldn't utilize the monolith a little bit, make it a little bit bigger, and potentially try to get a single advance out of this day. We'll have to see what the Finn can work with on their own at this point, with only a tiny jail left for the Sigismar player in the reserve and 1 card in hand. So we'll have to see which one that is too.
Yeah, maybe we can see a chain of cards though, something like a Baba Yaga. We can, it can be crazy sometimes what we can see from these Sigismar players in these late game spots. We used to see this sort of all the time with Ozmas coming out and chaining in these late game scenarios. Of course, Ozma being suspended at the moment, but sometimes these uniques and other cards that have the redraw effect help a lot in certain situations. But still, just looking so good for Fen. It's definitely worth noting that a lot of the cards that are sitting here in reserve are not optimal to be played from reserve, given the mana cost that they do have. So, and sometimes Fen doesn't have very high card quality in their own hand because they do not get to choose what enters the mana, unlike most heroes. So I'm a little bit worried on that end, but otherwise, I mean, you have to assume at this point that Fen's going to manage it, huh?
Yeah, I would have to agree with you there at this point, especially being able to play that martingale. It's almost guaranteeing the fact that we're going to see that last card in hand from the Sigismar because I doubt they'll want to play that tiny jail on the martingale to avoid that final card in hand. The token generators will be nice, but at this point, it's only producing maybe one other token with the addition of the card in hand. Not sure if that's gonna make too much of a difference here as we wait for the response, but never know, I guess. It's one of those scenarios where Sigismar has done crazier things, but, like you mentioned, looking quite good for the Finn player despite not having the best cards in the reserve at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think at this point it's a lot of chatting going on. Cladius showing off his actions per minute in the typing department, and yeah, finally does fire off the tiny jail on the martingale. That's definitely not where you want to be in this game. But yeah, if that's all you got, hey, you got to do it. I understand. Could be that the last card is something like a Sandman. That could be potentially a little bit of life if just something like this Amal gets played, for example, that would just block it up. But yeah, I'm assuming Fenn's not going to fall for that trap.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm just noticing about that unique Amal is that it has its the same effect of it from anywhere on its support ability. Um, so technically, there could be even less resources for Clay if even if it's just a one advance for the Sigmar player. So we'll have to see how that turns out. It is the onus is on the Finn player to decide what they are going to play at this point, and it will just be a Hathor from hand to throw some stats out there.
Yeah, that one is a little risky to play out just like that. There, I mean, assuming, although to be fair, at this point, maybe they just have another one and they don't care anyway. But if that last card is something like a Sandman, there is a potential actually for the Fen player just to not have what they need in order to prevent something from happening that goes Sigismar's way this turn. So they, you know, there's a world where Sigismar is still in it. If that is a Sandman, it'll get played out here. It'll be interesting to see what side it goes on. Presumably, it would be on that companion side where it should be good. But yeah. Otherwise, I don't think there's much options for Clay.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it turns out. As you mentioned, there is some chatting going on. Haven't quite taken a look at it just yet, but there is only one card left in hand. Really, the only decision is where you're going to play it, if you can even play it, which I have to assume that he can, and it is that Sandman that you have mentioned, and it will go on the companion side, will hit that Hathor and put him in a good position as far as all the cards that he could have had in hand and got hit by that Baba Yaga that he played earlier.
Yeah, totally true. It's nice, definitely getting that token in addition, meaning that just a martingale and off you go here. Or actually, I was thinking that martingale had to discount the off you go in order to play that. Wow, this could actually be a win here for Clay. Uh, if there wasn't a good draw from Fenton, it is a win for Clay. That's incredible.
Wow. So he just didn't have anything else. Whew. That must have been what the chatting was
Oh
about.
my god, that was shocking. Yeah, really, really impressive.
Yeah, clutch Baba Yaga there. It's crazy what just one draw can do for you. We saw it with the Aonis early on in round 4 of the Swiss, and we see it happen there too. So
Yeah, that Ortis Cadets unique that was able to draw the card there, so critical. Found him exactly what he needed, and it had to be pretty much exactly that as well. The and notably the fact that it was a token spammer as well was really relevant there. Being able to make sure that there were two characters on each side meant that there wasn't an out to wait an additional turn for the Fen and just remove the one character in the expedition where there was only one character. So yeah, that's incredible. Just what he needed at just the right time.
and I'm in Tarun folks game just as required. And if anyone is aware, that is a new unique for Clay as well. If you watch my video on blueoaktv.com, you'll be able to see that he shows it to me that he just got it and he had it run it before. So watch the video. Either way, um Runfolk doing Runfolk things as expected. And guess what? I was right. He was still playing once we finished.
Yeah, this is frankly, I think Runfolk is just committing war crimes in the game that we're watching right now. Currently with 14 cards in hand, definitely has a few options. One card left in deck, 5 cards in reserve, the ability to seemingly draw like 3 cards at dusk, plus whenever he plays a character, he'll get another card off of Isatok, meaning at this point, I think he's looping his deck. So even if the Aonis prevents an advance this turn from the Waru, he's just going to continue to go crazy from here on out. I don't think this is winnable anymore for Aonis.
And before, when we thought that ESA talk requirement of having 2 landmarks was crazy talk, well, guess what? 2 Bountiful Meadows.
Yeah, those are
Um,
the optimal ones for having that happen. I'm sure there's some others in there as well, but yeah, this is looking pretty sweet.
Yeah, a lot of stats on the board. All he needs is 1 advance here, and to be honest, the Afonis player is quite far away, so not looking ideal, and they are going in the negative as is tradition in Runefolk games. He knows what he's playing, and if he doesn't beat you regularly, he'll beat you by time, chances are. So, we do see that situation pop up here. A lot of stats, at least something will get sabotaged here. We do have a unique Quetzalcoatl for Roomfolk. When your opponent draws 1 or more cards, you can create 2 Mortis Recruits in my expedition, and it's an at dusk, draw 3 cards. I'm pretty sure that's the old Pluka card, if I'm not incorrect, that he used once upon a time in Waru Fame early days of AWOL. But
Yep, you got it. It
so
sure is.
beauty of being part of a team. Occasionally, players will let you borrow their uniques unless you try to steal them. Don't do that. Either way, we will see a lot of cards being drawn here, despite the game already being over. And congrats, Runefolk, you got to be on
Yeah,
stream.
stealing people's uniques just about as cool as smoking is, aka not very. So don't do that to your friends. Highly don't recommend it. But borrowing friends' uniques, that's very cool. So yeah, definitely making use of some cool uniques. There is Runefolk taking that match. Checking Dart's deck list, they do play 1 copy of Banishing Gate. I have to say, without that 1 copy of Banishing Gate, I think their chances in the matchup are like literally 1%. This matchup is so ridiculously bad for Afanis, where virtually nothing that you do matters at any point during the game. It's sort of absurd. Banishing Gate is one of the cards that actually does do things in the matchup, but just having one of them is also really rough, given that sometimes you're just incentivized to mana it early as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, at least we got to watch it, but that will be the end of round 6 of the AWOL Season 2 Wednesday Weekly number 6. Got to end it off in a fun little way there, but we did get to watch the finals early on where Altered Aces was triumphant. I will switch over here so we can take a look at the final results where my co-caster will read them off and talk about who won, who did well, and all that good stuff. And go for it.
Yeah, we're starting out with our top 3, who are all from Altered Aces. We have first place Citro with the 6-0 finish. Then going into our 5-1s, we have a good number of them today. 6 players at 5-1. That's Tempête de la Neige. We have Cladius. We have Nate 1 to Great 1. Ozymandias, and then managing another 5-1, Zoa54, that Lindway player that we saw, and then as well as Neuro from Altered Aces, also managing a 5-1 finish. So yeah, definitely a good day for Altered Aces today. Um, then hopping into our 4-2 players, we have actually there's someone from another team that I'm a little bit less familiar with, but started to hear some small details about. I think it's Bastion Bordelais. We have Turnus, something along the lines of that. From yeah, that's BB is the team acronym. We have Artur Bacalar, 4-2. Roscat 95, Nitract. We have Gamma Knight from Team After You, Snow from Bootcamp X Altered, and Embruza from After You as well. Then Coleum, Rised Sun, and Symbiosis, who was also on a Lindaway. Runefolk from Team AQZ on that Waru, Zotsab, Void Kingdom, Adrelak, and rounding out all of our 4-2 players, Tenera Oh man, this is a tongue twister. Tenar Ternarerdoth.
Nailed it.
Sorry for killing the pronunciation of your username, but great job finishing 4-2 to all of you, and thanks for everyone for playing. It was a cool tournament.
Yeah, indeed. Glad we were able to cast it, learn some things. I did some bad promotion as far as things that are cool, and then Keelan Guy was able to reverse that for us. So glad we got that sorted out for everyone. This has been the AWOL Season 2 Wednesday Weekly, number 6. 75 players here on a Wednesday, always a good time. And honestly, a good turnout in general as far as the results are concerned. Some good games, some good last minute plays for some players to take some victories, and we got to watch Runfolk ruin someone's last round. So honestly, a completion of
As
any
is typical, yeah.
yeah, a completion of any good bingo card, and got me to say some other card game too. So
It's
yeah,
true.
other than that, not much else going on here. I am extremely hungry as I was not expecting to cast today, but glad I was able to and have a good time here with the Keelon guy. I am Blue, also known as Blue Oak TV on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe and watch my most recent video that I was posted today involving one of the Alterdace's players that you can learn much more about. And this is my co-caster, once again, the Keelon guy. Why don't you talk about yourself one last time?
Yeah, again, one last time, I'm the Killon guy. Thanks for having me today. Loved it as always. I was really happy to cast 2 tournaments today, getting some great experience and making sure my voice can handle 6 hours of commentating, not just 3. I'm very happy to say that I am hanging in there perfectly fine and loving it. Feeling better now than I was 6 hours ago, even. So, where's more altered? I want more altered tournaments. Speaking of which, tomorrow evening there should be the AQZ championships. So, if you're looking to play some more tournament altered, definitely a good chance tomorrow night. I won't be part of that cast, but I believe there will be some lovely guests over on the Pandy Andy stream for that. So that should be exciting. And overall, yeah, tons of good altered being played. I'm excited about all of that. And a big thanks to you, Blue, for stepping in last minute when we were having some technical difficulties with Jalex's internet. So yeah, thanks for hopping in. That was super cool.
Yeah, I know everyone's disappointed in the YouTube comments that Jalex wasn't able to comment, but guess what? Too bad. It was me. Either way. Um, Past that, that is in fact the last bit of what we have to say here. Want to thank especially everyone in the chat. I've been watching our analytics as we went through today, and Wednesday's always been really great for the live stream. I think we hit another peak today as far as the AWOL stream for viewers. So thank you for everyone that has joined and that is still currently in the chat, chatting along and just watching us and hearing us talk even if you're not actually watching and it's just absent-minded listening. Really do appreciate it. And other than that, I'll have to see you again next week potentially, or I may be taking the week off. I'm not sure yet. Either way, yeah, sub count's doing great too per Simon. I'm glad I can be a brand risk for him anytime that I'm on stream. But yeah,
Uh,
that's it. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Take care, everyone. Love you all.